movies was pointless, but he wasn't an extremely forgiving person either. He didn't know why the feelings he'd been expecting hadn't appeared. It was as though he'd just completed the first task of a series. The end was probably there, beyond the nothingness, the sky, and the world. Viera, it would be nice if you could see this. Jeong-woo called the name of his old lover, whom he planned to meet one day. Did she know he had awakened? Perhaps she wasn't even looking in his direction, too blinded by her passion to get to the higher floors like in the past? He stood like that for a long time. However, regardless of how long he waited, no responses or messages appeared. Jeong-woo laughed at himself. He felt like someone who'd posted on social media hoping that an old lover would see how well he was living without her, even though his old lover wasn't interested in him at all. Then, I have to go up, he promised himself. If she wouldn't look at him, he'd make her see. And after that, Jeong-woo made himself stop. He'd just be more pathetic the more he thought about it. He turned around to leave. Infected Mother Earth stares at you. Jeong-woo's eyes widened as he whipped his head around. It was only a moment, but a gaze had turned to him. It disappeared quickly, but his senses had caught it. With a smirk, Jeong-woo began to walk. Waking up hadn't been all in vain. However, at that moment, his body grew translucent, revealing the letters inside him. Jeong-woo only covered it with his arm as though it wasn't a big deal. His eyes grew heavy. What happened? Lam woke up with a frown. There was a ringing in her ears, and she couldn't think properly. Then, she began to remember bit by bit Yeon-woo's subordinates and his party members charging forward, Pluto jumping into the fray, Iapetos releasing his divine level when he was cornered, a heat wave intense enough to cut apart mountains, the soldiers being swept away, broken formation, screams of burning soldiers. Lam's head shot up as she remembered the last image. She recalled fainting after trying to save the soldiers in the hell of fire. Please be alive, Lam repeatedly muttered to herself as she looked around. The air was hazy from the heat, and she couldn't see properly. Only after forcing magic power onto her eyes could she finally see around her. Ah! The sight was devastating. Black lumps lay around, presumably the remains of her soldiers, and the only survivors were the higher-level officials who had a bit of divine level. Clang! They were fighting a difficult battle against Iapetos' subordinates. It was even more difficult to find survivors from the 13th Corps. Lam clenched her teeth. Why hadn't she thought of it? Releasing the divine level, or the giant god's power, was a weapon that the Titans saved for the very end. The giant god's power was the energy that Cronus had left behind, and Titans could regain a significant amount of their lost divine level after absorbing it. It was how they'd managed to bulldoze their way to Hades. Since the giant god's power was the Titans' life and strength, it couldn't be replenished once it was used up, and so Titans were very careful about deploying it. However, Iapetos had released his divine level and used up most of his power. He didn't even just stop at one time but unleashed it multiple times. It didn't matter how good Pluto's formation was, the divine level would destroy them all. Lam used her spear to support herself up. She had to clean up before even more damage occurred. What happened to Iapetos? Just then, she heard Iapetos roaring. Die! I'll kill you, human! He was now about 100 meters in height instead of kilometers, and his aura had diminished according to how much he'd shrunk. However, he was still big. Yeon-woo gasped for breath above his head. Hugh! Hugh! Hadn't he been swept away by the storm with her? Lam's eyes widened in shock when she saw Yeon-woo. However, Yeon-woo's attention was fixed on Iapetos below. That almost got me. He hadn't expected the sudden release of power either. Yeon-woo's plan was to pretend to be injured by Iapetos and wait for Paneth's party to make their move. He had already discussed it with Kong, certain that Kong could defend himself since he could use Bien freely. He'd also provided a stage for Jeong-woo in order to keep his promise to let Jeong-woo kill Ether with his own hands. Fortunately, Nemesis skills were excellent, so it was easy to set up. If Paneth's party fell into the trap, many of them would die. Even if some were lucky enough to survive, their future was grim since Tartarus was the front line that protected Olympus from the Titans and Giants. They were dabbling in betrayal, and on Poseidon's orders at that. It might have been alright if they'd managed to get rid of him, but with Yeon-woo still alive, Poseidon and the others would have to tiptoe around Hades. Of course, Poseidon and the goddesses would deny their involvement and abandon Paneth's party. What came next was obvious. Hades wouldn't let them be, and even if they somehow managed to escape, only hunger and thirst awaited them in the treacherous Tartarus. Yeon-woo didn't care if they were put on death row or starved to death. He only needed Paneth, who had directly received the blessings of the gods. However, his own carelessness had placed Yeon-woo into danger. "Thank you, Nike. It's a relief you're safe. Don't take too many risks." Flames rose slightly, and Nike appeared to look at Yeon-woo with worried eyes before disappearing again. Time difference. Yeon-woo sped up his thoughts and analyzed how he could deal with Iapetos. Cronus's power is too dangerous. I don't know if I'll be unscathed if the same thing occurs again. The damage to Dis Pluto was more serious than he thought. Another heat wave would end things. There was only one option left. It's a bit too soon. Yeon-woo's eyes widened under his mask. But I have to use the other wing. The slowed down time returned to normal. I'll kill you, human. Iapetos growled, stretching his hand up after realizing Yeon-woo was cheekily standing on his head. Yeon-woo jumped high in the sky before Iapetos' hand could reach him. I want to ask if that's the only thing you can say, but before that, I should thank you. What nonsense are you spouting? Iapetos heard Yeon-woo's mosquito-like voice and focused all his senses towards him. Now that he could no longer restore his power as one of the 12 Titans, he was thinking that he would only feel better if he ripped Yeon-woo apart. Even though he'd lost his divine level, he was still a god. A whirlwind spun around at his command, ready to burn Yeon-woo alive. However, Yeon-woo was calm even in the face of the oncoming storm. The more intense his enemy's aura was, the better it was for him since he could complete the right wing faster. Sky Wings, right, is being composed. Keyword, War. Searching for powers that fit the keyword. The search is unsuccessful. The search is unsuccessful. The owners of the powers refused to have their powers searched. The Wing of Death had been relatively easier to make because it was centered on the Black King's power, which meant all the subordinates of the Black King were willing to cooperate. However, the need to balance the right wing with the Wing of Death created a lot of problems. First, there were no candidates for the core of the wing. Unlike the gods and demons of death who had a clear hierarchy, the other gods and demons were busy fighting over who was better. There were also complex relationships between them. He considered using the Ruyi Bang pieces as an element, but he quickly rejected the idea since the Monkey King had too many enemies. As he'd struggled to come up with ideas, he decided to change his perspective. Did the frame for the concept of the wing have to be a complete one? Would it be acceptable to everyone if it lacked conditions? Wouldn't that be fine? Yeon-woo was planning to make himself the core of the right wing. His entire life had been a battle. He'd fought with poverty in his youth, fought his mother's illness during his teens, and had fought in Africa as a young man. And now, he was fighting with the tower, climbing floor by floor. The keyword has been changed. Each fight had been difficult, and many had ended in failure. However, Yeon-woo had never tried to run away, and he always gained something from the experience, no matter how small. It was the same thing for the gods and demons who gave Yeon-woo powers. Most of them were transcendents from birth, but to become true gods and demons, they had to create their own level, which was filled with difficult tasks. They had to fight against fate and their own selves. New keyword, fight. This was why Yeon-woo wanted to use his accomplishments to create the right wing. He did things that no one else had achieved in the tower, things that the 5,000 gods and demons would be greedy for. Also, Yeon-woo was confident he would add more feats to his list in the future. That was also a fight. All he had to do was simply continue down the path he had been walking on his whole life. Yeon-woo was telling the gods and demons that if they lent him their strength, they should go all in. He would gather them and create a complete item. The right wing was the unification of all his accomplishments. It was the basis for a legend, which he needed to become a god. As soon as he balanced the two wings, he'd gain the divine level he sought. In other words, he wanted the domain of fighting. Flash! The scapulae along Yeon-woo's back began to glow faintly. The wing of death was entirely black, but this wing was flaming red. His current opponent was Iapetos, whom he wouldn't encounter under normal circumstances, so the keyword had activated in response. Powers that fit the newly changed keyword are being searched for. Searching for powers. Searching for powers. This time, there was no message saying that the search was incomplete. The gods and demons were contemplating deeply after he changed the keyword. If they gave their powers, the provisional contract would be broken, and their powers would likely become cogwheels of the right wing, like those of the gods and demons who'd lost their powers to the left wing. Just when Yeon-woo thought no one would step up, a message appeared. The first search has been successful. The power goddess stigmata that Athena from the godly society has bestowed upon you has become the first component. A message from Athena has arrived. Message: it's a misunderstanding. A message from Athena has arrived. Message: it has nothing to do with him. It may have been like that at the beginning, but you're the one I'm supporting now. I will always protect you. Soon, more messages began to pop up one after the other. The power heaven and earth transportation that Hermes has bestowed upon you has become the second component. The power faceless lawbook that Hundun has bestowed upon you has become the third component. A message from Agars has arrived. Message: shit. Just when I went to the bathroom. A message from Agars has arrived. Message: me, too. Me, too. The power wicked devil that Agars has bestowed upon you has become the sixth component. Chapter 377. Gigantomachia, 2. Vimalasatra smiles with pleasure. He is deeply interested in the decision you made. Vimalasatra hopes that his power will be utilized better. The power Black Gubatera that Vimalasatra has bestowed upon you has become the 34th component. That was the last message. 34 powers had agreed to become cogwheels for the right wing under the keyword. It was a tiny number compared to the 5,000 powers, but they were significant. Athena, Hermes, and Hundun, beings who had favored Yeon-woo since the beginning, were superior divine beings who occupied important positions in their societies. The weight of their powers simply couldn't be underestimated. The combined powers of mid-level or low-level beings couldn't even compare to a single one of theirs. Vimalasatra, who had willingly given his most important power, was immense enough to do the role of hundreds of thousands. The right wing now had weight, and the powers began to work together like one piece of machinery. At first, the powers were so different that it was hard for them to flow together, but once the purple energy from Superbia adjusted the differences, the cogwheels began to turn with maximum speed. Since Yeon-woo was in a perilous situation, it was the moment for the fight keyword to prove itself. Yeon-woo could feel the extraordinary amount of holy power and demonic energy flowing into his body. The divine and demonic factors greeted each other in a welcoming manner. Crunch! On the other hand, the draconic factors attempted another transformation in order to keep the balance. The potential of his demonic divine dragon body grew once again. Time difference. Yeon-woo sped up his thinking once more to make a quick judgment. He had only 30 seconds to maintain this explosive strength, and he had to ensure that things were ended by then. No. It's too difficult using only the right wing. Yeon-woo pulled out the left wing as well. Unlike the quivering right wing, the blazing wing of death soared up to the sky. The two wings spread open, and the window to use them shrank. He now had only 11 seconds. Yeon-woo quickly opened subspace to pull out Vigrid. 10 seconds. He released Blink, which rushed to Iapeto's right shoulder. 9 seconds. The heat that had gathered to catch Yeon-woo instantly changed direction. Sharp winds blew down on Yeon-woo's head. The wing of death flapped, scattering them. Boom! There was a series of explosions as Yeon-woo gripped Vigrid and stabbed Iapeto's shoulder. 8 seconds. The energy from spreading both wings rushed into Vigrid. Nike. Okay. Just leave it to me? Nike transformed into holy fire at Yeon-woo's urgent call and entered the sword. There, he conducted the energy and flared up. Whoosh! The fire grew to an uncontrollable size and swallowed Iapeto's. Iapeto screamed in pain. 7 seconds. He thrashed around in an attempt to rid himself of Yeon-woo, but Yeon-woo didn't budge. Vigrid dug in even deeper and the fire burned even more brightly. This was all due to a trait of Vigrid that he'd gained some time ago. Before catching Astrius, Yeon-woo had received a message explaining that he'd completed part of Vigrid's hidden conditions. It carried a clue that would help him uncover its hidden name. Hidden quest / a concealed name. Description: after the Great Holy Sword was created during the Silver Age, it passed through the hands of many heroes and gained and lost many names. Then, after it was cursed and changed into a demonic sword, it lost all of its glorious names and was abandoned in an empty cave for hundreds of years to wait for a new owner. It met you and began to regain its function as a holy sword. It is close to its former glory, and after being washed clean by holy power and dragon blood, the curse is disappearing. However, its lost names have been buried in myths and legends, and there is no way to find them again. The name Vigrid is a fake name, but Vigrid never thought of looking for its old names until its spirituality was awakened after transcendence. It would like to search for its old name again. Names are important to the characteristics of an item. Only after recovering its old name will Vigrid fully regain its glory. From now on, every time an achievement is made, a clue will be provided. Use these clues to look for the old names. When a name is found, Vigrid will develop a new trait and magical appearance. Conditions: Vigrid's owner must possess transcendence. Time limit. Achievement conditions: 1 additional accomplishment. Clue provided. 2 clues solved. True name discovered. 3 true name opened. Trait released. Asterisk currently available clues: 2/1 All the heroes who held this sword were mighty. Their names are legendary. 2 One owner cut a giant's arm off and took possession of the sword. The curse of the giant has remained in the sword, and the owners of the sword since then haven't been able to avoid it. He had been given 2 clues, although they sounded just like a typical heroic tale and he found it difficult to make a guess. However, since he'd already used Vigrid for a long time, Yeon-woo could guess the determination of the spirituality in the sword, and even without that, he could guess the characteristics. He already had a few names in mind, and with the clue provided by the quest, he was sure he was right. Durandal. It was the sword that Hector, the hero of the epic poem The Iliad, had stolen from the giant Jutmundus. Despite being inferior in power and receiving a prediction that he would lose, the hero fought again and again to protect his motherland before dying from Jutmundus's curse. Durandal was as bright as the victories of the great hero, and it had to be one of Vigrid's former names. 6 seconds. Most items that gained transcendence exhibited strength based on their accomplishments. These accomplishments were legends, and Durandal's legend was that it had been used to kill a giant. It meant that it had an outstanding nature for dealing with giants. The being that Yeon-woo was fighting was a god that was as large as a giant, which meant that Vigrid had an advantage. Vigrid has gained a true name, Durandal. The true name of Durandal has been released. Folklore: giant killing. The amount of transcendence Yeon-woo had gained was far too small and he was unable to release Durandal's complete true name, but with the holy fire, it was strong enough. Iapeto screamed as the flames wrapped around his body. His dark body turned red from heat, blistering and forming cracks all over the skin. Flames dripped down like lava among the cracks. Iapetos attempted to release his divine level once more. He would no longer be able to become a great god again, but his situation was too precarious. However, his body didn't listen to him for some reason, as though it had been bound tightly by something. Iapetos realized what it was and scowled at the eyes glaring at him in the skies. Athena! You bitch, you! Had she paid a price for the laws of causality? If so, what had she exchanged for the ability to stop a divine being? Even if the columns of lights made the exchanges between Olympus and Tartarus become smoother, she'd have needed a significant sacrifice. It didn't stop there. Beings as tiny as flies to him appeared through an open space. Bu's eyes attacked him, while Shannon, Han Ryeong, and Rebecca appeared once more and whipped around him. There were also other creatures he'd never seen before. A dark shadow loomed over the ground and tentacles sprang up to wrap around Iapetos. Spirit Gwai. An evolved form of Gwai. They stay hidden in the shadows of the spiritual world and only appear when needed. They were Yeon-woo's shadow, and they moved entirely according to his will. 5 seconds. 4 seconds. 3 seconds. The clock continued to tick as Iapetos' giant body collapsed. 2 seconds. 1 second. When Yeon-woo reached his limit, his wings released, and he fell to the ground, his entire body exhausted. Was it because he'd forcefully used 2 incomplete wings? Whatever it was, the demonic divine dragon body finally hit a wall. Vigrid lost Durandal's form and returned to its usual appearance. However, as he fell, a faint smile appeared on Yeon-woo's face. He felt a lot of pride in discovering how far his strength went before hitting its limits. He was now strong enough to go toe-to-toe and even defeat divine beings. I'll kill you. Kill? Iapetos glowered at Yeon-woo now that he'd been released from pain. Flames still ate away at his body, and pieces of his flesh rained down as black energy poured out from the cracks, like water leaking out of a broken pot. Cronus power was leaving his body, and that was the reason Iapetos couldn't make a move even though he greatly desired to kill Yeon-woo. No, no. He struggled to hold on to Cronus power, but it escaped through his fingers. The giant god's power swirled around and rushed to Yeon-woo, entering the manacle and fetter. The cast of the Black King cried with pleasure after eating Cronus power. All of this occurred before Yeon-woo could even blink. Arg! Iapetos exploded with rage. He had not only failed to defeat Yeon-woo, he also lost his power. His body was already shrinking and returning to normal. His eyes were fixed on Yeon-woo, who barely managed to land safely. I'll kill you even if it means death. Iapetos slowly approached Yeon-woo, too weak to even finish his sentence. Still, a titan was a titan. He had the strength to kill a player who had exhausted himself. Rescue Kane. Protect Kane. Lam and the remaining Dis-Pluto members rushed towards Yeon-woo. Enough? Suddenly, the sky divided as a colossal pair of eyes filled with amusement appeared. It was Typhon. Chapter 378. Gigantomachia, 3. Typhon. Iapetos looked up at the sky with a stiff expression. Typhon's arrival meant that he was trying to get in the way of his mission. This fight is your loss. Iapetos. What are you talking about? All I have to do now is kill this bastard. Can't you see, or won't you? Typhon's eyes were so cold that they sent shivers down the spine. I said, to look out for that child, do you not see, behind him? Iapetos turned towards the direction that Typhon was looking at. Yeon-woo was gasping for breath, forcing out the last of his strength to fight Typhon. He was surrounded by Lam and the other Dis-Pluto soldiers. They were clearly intent on protecting him. However, Iapetos saw something else. There was a large number of gods and demons standing behind Yeon-woo, some of them glaring at Iapetos. Of course, it was impossible for them to descend from the heavenly world, but Athena and Hermes seemed ready to do so as soon as they paid the price. Cernunno's and Vimalasitra's gazes were sharp as well. Athena's and Hermes' actions made sense, since the Olympians and Titans were enemies. However, why was Cernunno's, who despised being associated with societies, and Vimalasitra, who looked down even on other demons, standing with the human? That wasn't all. A message from Agars has arrived. Message, it's mine. A message from Agars has arrived. Message, if you touch what's mine, I'll kill you. The lofty Grand Duke of the East was scowling at him like he wanted to rip him apart. What was happening? Iapetos couldn't understand why great gods and demons were shielding the mortal. He was only sure that if he killed that player, all those gods and demons would become his enemies. However, he wasn't scared. With the columns of light appearing, the Titans finally had a chance to ascend to Olympus. They were preparing to reclaim their lost strength as soon as they arrived in the heavenly world. Since their final objective was to rule the heavenly world, they would have to go to war with those beings one day. However, it wasn't the right time yet. They had to subjugate Olympus first to have the foundation to declare war, and they didn't want to make any unnecessary enemies at the moment. But do I have to retreat like this? The human was within an arm's reach, and his weak neck could be broken so easily. The little bastard was even smiling. Although his face was hidden behind a mask, his eyes were curved as though he were laughing and challenging Iapetos to make an attempt to attack. That smile made Iapetos lose his temper. I'll kill you. Didn't you hear me, telling you to stop? Iapetos. Iapetos ignored Typhon's words as he stretched out towards Yeon-woo. Yeon-woo's lips curved under the mask, and suddenly, white lightning shot down from the sky, as sharp as a knife. As he was about to reach Yeon-woo, Iapetos' right arm fell to the ground. Arg! Iapetos had already been terribly injured from using Cronus power. The new attack, which was filled with draconic energy, dealt a critical blow to his soul. Iapetos gripped his stump and stepped back. Blood splattered to the ground as Jeong-woo spread his magnificent white wings in the sky and quietly landed. His silver armor and blade shone with a regal aura. You're late. What are you talking about? I hurried over as fast as I could. Jeong-woo ignored Yeon-woo's scolding and turned Dragon Slayer toward Iapetos. Should I finish my second round with that ugly guy? Black clouds were wavering around Iapetos, which meant that his surroundings were entering the brink of a dream. Under normal circumstances, the power of his soul would make this impossible, but now, he wasn't even as strong as Nemesis Barrier. This was the reason why Yeon-woo had been so calm. Jeong-woo's soul was very unstable and at a dangerous point. But if a special condition were satisfied, his soul would become as strong as the spirit of a hero, thanks to the level he'd achieved before he died. It was a level that had broken through Red Dragon's siege and destroyed the Summer Queen's heart. If Jeong-woo's former power returned, Yeon-woo was sure he would be victorious against the Titan. Jeong-woo could keep up his power for only a short time, but Yeon-woo felt like he'd be able to hold Vigrid again once that was up. The Philosopher's Stone was already circulating energy from the Soul Stone, and his demonic divine dragon body had almost recovered. Iapetos clenched his teeth. His right arm had been severed so pointlessly. Rage filled his head, but his godly eyes could read the changes the brothers were going through, and he could guess what Yeon-woo was planning. I will not allow any more disobedience. Iapetos? Typhon's last warning stopped him from moving. He wasn't in the best situation. He was surrounded by Pluto, and from the abnormal energy around her, Lam, Hades' apostle, seemed to be preparing for a manifestation. If he continued to fight, he'd lose. How could one of the 12 original Titans lose to mere mortals? However, nothing would change no matter how furious he got. Iapetos slowly backtracked, biting his lower lip. Even as he retreated, his eyes were focused on Yeon-woo. Next time we meet, I'll take your head, no matter what. With that, Iapetos vanished and hid himself in a space that Typhon granted. However, Typhon didn't disappear as well. He frowned, as if he were dissatisfied with something, and turned to look at Yeon-woo. Suddenly, his eyes curved happily, as though he were having the time of his life. Even though Iapetos is a loser, amazing. I get why. Hermes and Athena are so protective, why Poseidon is so wary. The trait cold-blooded repels an unknown pressure. The trait cold-blooded repels an unknown pressure. Yeon-woo stared back at Typhon, sensing a threat from him. Even though he'd been locked up in Tartarus for a long time, Typhon spoke like he knew about everything going on in Olympus. The descendant of Black King. Death rightly belongs to you, but I'll tell you one thing, the Black King's power shouldn't be used in that manner. It is a power that belongs with us, not with the traitor Olympus. Traitor. Yeon-woo looked at Typhon with wide eyes. Just then, a drawing he'd seen in Olympus' treasury flashed through his mind. It was of a nameless god falling into the netherworld because of Zeus and the other gods. Cronus was his apostle, and we have continued Cronus' legacy, so you as well? Boom! There was suddenly an immense pressure from the sky that seemed intent on stopping Typhon from speaking more. Yeon-woo turned his head towards the source of the pressure and noticed that Hermes and Athena's channels had grown darker, as though they were glaring at Typhon and signaling him not to speak any further. Typhon's eyes curved more. It appears, your guardian gods would not like me to speak with you further. We'll finish our discussion another time. The eyes started to fade away. That won't be too far in the future, so I'll be waiting for you to come. With those words, Typhon finally disappeared. The pressure in the air dissipated as though it had never been there, and a heavy silence descended on them. Plop! Then, the silence was broken by Plutos, who were weakly collapsing to the ground. They no longer had any strength left in their legs. From the raiding of the holy territories and Iapetos' appearance to the battle with Iapetos' subordinates and the arrival of Typhon, it was the most intense combat that they'd ever experienced. Lam also slumped on the ground. She had used the last of her strength for the manifestation of Hades. Jeong-woo had returned to the pocket watch to rest as well. However, Yeon-woo continued to brood over what Typhon said. Cronus was the Black King's apostle. Now that he thought about it, when Yeon-woo had fallen into Tartarus near Cronus' corpse, the caste of the Black King had trembled furiously. And the caste of the Black King had sucked up Cronus' power leaking from Iapetos naturally, as if they had always complemented each other. It made sense that Cronus' power was from the Black King, and it was understandable why Poseidon, Demeter, Hestia, and Hera would be so wary of the power. Zeus and Poseidon's generation took over Olympus after defeating Cronus and the other Titans. It's natural that they'd be frightened of the Black King behind the Titans. That was the Titanomachia. However, Hermes and Athena's generation hadn't experienced the Titanomachia and could respect Cronus instead of tremble in fear at his name. If they had begun to support the Black King, it made sense that they would favor Yeon-woo, who was the successor of the Black King. Is that it? Yeon-woo looked up and shared his thoughts. The gods didn't clarify anything. Hermes smiles ruefully. Athena is silent. Yeon-woo took it as a silent affirmation. However, because of this, he still had a few more questions. He couldn't imagine a concept god taking on another god as an apostle. If Cronus, who was one of the greatest gods of his time, was just an apostle, then how incredible would the Black King be? You know something, right? He asked the demonism inside the Philosopher's Stone, but all that came back was strange laughter. Keek. Chapter 379 Gigantomachia, 4. This place is complete mayhem, 2. Khan arrived approximately an hour later, covered in wounds, his eyes still bright with ferocity. It was clear that he'd been involved in an intense battle, as well. He carelessly tossed an object that he'd been carrying on his back to the ground in front of Yeon-woo. Pluto turned to look at the two, only realizing just then that Khan and Paneth's party had disappeared during the fight with Iapetos. They were curious to find out what had happened, since conflict between the two sides would be a big concern. However, they couldn't tell what Khan had tossed on the ground. It was covered in blood, but since it was squirming, it was clearly alive. However, it didn't look human. At closer inspection, they realized that all of its limbs had been cut off, and its face and body were covered in burns and frostbite. It finally registered to Lam, whom the familiar aura belonged to. "Is that Paneth?" she wriggled in response to Lam's words. Lam's eyes widened. She'd guessed that they had ended up in a fight with Yeon-woo's party, but she never imagined that Paneth would return in this state. She was a hero who'd made remarkable contributions in the past few months, the master of the family of divine blood, the face of the Elohim, and she was backed by several greater gods in Olympus. Although Lam was stronger than Paneth, she still acknowledged Paneth. Along with the others, she looked in shock at Khan, who only snorted and crossed his arms over his chest like it was no big deal. "Do you feel better now?" Yeon-woo talked to Jeong-woo as he recovered, curious to know how his meeting with Ether had gone. "I don't know. Just..." After a short silence, Jeong-woo answered from inside the pocket watch. "I feel better, but also like shit." Yeon-woo nodded in understanding. The stress of reliving the past must have been greater than the relief of vengeance. The special benefit had also crammed innumerable memories and experiences into Jeong-woo's head, which made it even more difficult. "But Hyung, what are you gonna do about this?" "About what?" "This bastard. Are you gonna lug him around?" He pointed at Ether's soul, which was making depressed noises inside the soul collection. It had no memory of its previous life and only remembered the fear of death. "I want to turn it into a supplement that I can give my subordinates, but you can have it if you want it." "I don't." Jeong-woo answered casually with a laugh. "You know what I want the most, right?" Yeon-woo laughed as well. Then, his eyelids lowered slightly and he muttered, "Just wait a little longer." The footsteps of the injured Dis-Pluto were heavier when they returned, but the temple of King of the Underworld greeted them heartily. They could finally feel Hades' holy power after the ascension of the four columns of light. Along with their defeat of Iapetos, this kept their spirits high even though they had sustained a great deal of damage. They had made huge progress in the war, and they were overjoyed that they could hope for support from Olympus now that the light columns had risen. It was possible to see the end of the interminable war. However, the news about Paneth and her party's treachery shocked Dis-Pluto. They'd seen them as comrades and heroes, and yet they'd resorted to such cowardly and despicable acts. Everyone knew that there was bad blood between Paneth's party and Yeon-woo's party, but this was simply unacceptable. It was a grave crime to betray a comrade in Dis-Pluto, and it was punishable by death, especially if the betrayal happened on a battlefield. It was a relief that most of Paneth's party had died on the spot, but the mastermind was still alive. Although she was on the brink of death, healing magic could still fix her a bit since the divine blood in her kept her breathing. It was a blessing that perhaps seemed more like a curse for Paneth now. What a grotesque state! Hades laughed incredulously after listening to what happened. He'd been expecting some kind of treachery, but it was a pleasant surprise that it had ended in futility. However, what truly stunned him was that Poseidon and the goddesses were pretending not to know anything about the whole thing. As he felt the gazes of his brothers and sisters, Hades clucked his tongue. "Those shameless fools! They grew more arrogant in the time that I've been gone. Although they were family, they had a hierarchy. Zeus might be the leader, but Hades was still the oldest among them, and even Zeus listened to him. Besides that, Hades was the king of the underworld, and everything that occurred there was under his jurisdiction. Just 1,000 years ago, Olympus couldn't even interfere in Tartarus, and Olympus had surrendered to him several times. Had too much time passed? Or did they think he would look past their actions since they were the only ones who could help Tartarus? They hadn't said a single word of apology after humiliating Hades. In fact, they stood even taller, as if they had nothing to be ashamed of. It seemed as if they were implying that they would only send support if everyone accepted that only Paneth was to blame, muddying the waters. I apologize. I accept all punishment willingly. Lam bowed in shame to Hades, who was deep in thought. Hades grinned. What do you have to be sorry about? I should have known this would happen. It's fine. You've accomplished great things. You deserve to be rewarded. How can you expect me to punish you? The fault lies with those who planned this. It's not as if you can predict the future. Lam bowed her head even more. The incident had happened because she'd stubbornly pushed for the expedition despite Hades' reluctance. It seemed that he'd been anticipating that something like it would occur. However, she hadn't understood him despite being his apostle. Instead, she had been too eager for a victory. Although the raids were successful, they'd been humiliated by Olympus and lost the advantage in their battle of wits. She felt the injustice of the situation keenly. Olympus was the one at fault, but Tartarus was the one who had to worry about causing offense. And if Olympus sent their support and Tartarus was at peace again, it was obvious who would have the upper hand. Hades' divine level would fall, and this frustrated Lam. And yet, at the same time, they couldn't reject any support. She felt crushed. However, Hades grinned again. How can you still not know me after serving me for 100 years? Lam's eyes widened. She didn't understand his meaning, and Hades' smile grew bigger. As usual, it was a lopsided smile that looked cynical, but Lam could tell that Hades was truly enjoying himself. I'm more offended that a mere player is testing me. What do you mean, sir? Why don't you come in now? Suddenly, the door to the temple burst open, and Yeon-woo slowly walked in looking as though he'd already regained all of his strength. If he'd learned anything from this experience, it was that the demonic divine dragon body was better at recovering than he thought. He could now control his body better after testing its limits. The demonic divine dragon body was full of potential, and even Jeong-woo was amazed after observing Yeon-woo. If Yeon-woo was successful with the 4th and 5th step awakenings and gained the giant factor on top of that, how powerful would he be? To Yeon-woo, completing his body was as important as the Black King's power. It would play an important role in finishing his right wing. I'll leave her disposal to you. You may take her away. Thank you. Yeon-woo bowed. His shadow stretched out like taffy and swallowed Paneth's body. Leaving Paneth to Yeon-woo meant that Hades didn't care at all what happened to her. Poseidon and the goddesses might think that Hades had bent to their will, but Yeon-woo knew different. What an old fox! Hades had caught on to what Yeon-woo was planning to do with Paneth. Hades would never ignore his siblings' impertinence regardless of Tartarus' situation. He was going to return what they did to him and pretend not to know anything. Yeon-woo quietly left the temple. Lam's eyes narrowed as she watched him. What did Hades mean by saying that Yeon-woo had tested him? There seemed to be a silent agreement between them, but she had no idea what it was. Only one thought ran through Paneth's head: I want to die, please let me die in peace. Her thoughts rushed through her head without a chance of being spoken when suddenly, she felt her body revitalized, and she could see again. Her reason returned as she grew more alert. The first thing she saw was a demon in a black mask. Go away. Traumatic memories made her convulse as she struggled to escape. It was only then that she realized that she no longer had arms and legs. Ugh! Paneth screamed at her hideous state. It was impossible. She was the leader of the mighty Protogenoi tribe, someone who was going to become a god and enter the heavenly world. There was no way she could be reduced to this state. Yeon-woo blocked her screams with his hand and growled in annoyance. Shut up! Paneth couldn't move after seeing his eyes. She was overwhelmed with fear. She wanted to shake the fear off, but she couldn't. Yeon-woo looked down at her as though she were a bug. It was a look that she had always given others, not one that she ever expected to receive herself. You protogenoi are always acting like you're the best when you've got nothing to show after your top layer has been peeled off. You're all the same. Paneth couldn't muster the courage to deny it. I wonder what the real gods are like. As he spoke, he pulled up the power of the soul stone and blew it into Paneth. MMMPH. Paneth realized what Yeon-woo was trying to do and thrashed around. If he succeeded, she would never get out alive. She hoped for death, but her soul would be destroyed as well. She didn't want to just vanish like this, but there was nothing she could do. Her body stiffened like a block of wood, and the whites of her eyes showed. A magical energy began to flow out of her burned body, which turned white as her spirit form appeared. It was a familiar sight to Yeon-woo. It was the same thing that occurred when Poseidon descended before Bentik died. However, back then, Poseidon had forced the manifestation. This time, it was Yeon-woo who was pulling it out. He used the data from the channel that had given Paneth blessings and favors and restored the channel. It was nearly impossible for a player to force a god's manifestation, but Paneth's special blood and the traces of the channel made it possible. Even if he couldn't pull the god down all the way, he could summon a part of their being. Also, Yeon-woo was second to none at controlling channels, and the energy of the soul stone helped. 4 spirit forms appeared as Paneth disappeared: Poseidon, Demeter, Hestia, and Hera. He had succeeded in restoring all 4 channels. A human cannot dare? Poseidon's faint image growled. However, the manifestation was weak, so he couldn't apply too much pressure on Yeon-woo. The same went for the goddesses. Yeon-woo didn't reply and instead, he quietly opened his left hand. Devour. Clack, clack. Sharp fangs appeared on the black bumps. Chapter 380. Gigantomachia, 5. Do you think you can get away with this? The rage was evident in Poseidon's voice at being forced to manifest once more after Bentik. He was furious that a little bug would now take his factor twice. Soon, the stairs between Olympus and Tartarus will be opened. Do you think you can survive facing me? Yeon-woo clearly didn't care what Poseidon said. Bathory's vampiric sword skill proficiency has dramatically increased. After the jaws ravenously swallowed Poseidon's factors, they continued on to gobble up Hestia's, Hera's, and Demeter's factors. The components of each god's holy power were different. Poseidon's was like a turbulent wave, Hestia's a warm hearth, Hera's sharp, and Demeter's soft. Yeon-woo could only sense these differences because he had some level of divine factors. The pressure of the factors was so intense so most players would be overwhelmed from being next to them. I now understand why Poseidon is so wary of you after seeing it for myself. Unlike Hestia and Hera, who were absorbed without too many words, Demeter spoke up. However, Yeon-woo couldn't sense any anger from her as he had with Poseidon. And I understand why Hermes and Athena protect you so much. The entire heavenly world is in an uproar with rumors about you. I can see why. Her voice was full of mixed feelings. But you should be careful, Demeter spoke in a whisper, the turbulence is just beginning. Even the successor of the Black King cannot avoid. Her voice was cut off because her factor had been completely absorbed. Swoosh! Yeon-woo felt the divine factors taking their places inside him. The potential of the demonic divine dragon body added a tear. However, Yeon-woo was frowning at Demeter's words. Turbulence? What did that mean? Demeter was the mother of Persephone, Hades' wife. It was possible that she wasn't entirely on Poseidon's side, and there was clearly some significance to her words. Yeon-woo was lost in thought when he suddenly felt a gaze on him. Jeong-woo had left the pocket watch and was watching him. What? It's just that I think it's ridiculous. Yeon-woo waited for him to continue. You're probably the only person in the world who has ever exploited gods? Yeon-woo avoided Jeong-woo's eyes and turned away. That temper. He heard Jeong-woo mutter to himself, but he pretended not to hear. Just then, Shannon's face popped out of the shadows, nodding in agreement. His and Jeong-woo's eyes met in deep understanding. After that, time passed quickly. Pluto's next attacks cut through Tartarus like a fire roaring through a dry forest. They suffered losses just as they had in the battle with Iapetos, and the entire corps was nearly annihilated. However, Pluto was accustomed to this kind of damage, and after retreating for the last 100 years, they were fired up by the victory that seemed within their grasp. In the center of them all, boom! Swoosh! Stood Yeon-woo. Ares shouts at your performance. Sekhmet rubs her lips greedily. She is pleased with the slaughter. Sir Nunnos blesses the spirit Rebecca in order to help you. He contemplates taking a new apostle. For Yeon-woo, Tartarus was the greatest stage. The Skywings were still incomplete, and he needed to take part in more dangerous battles to finish them. However, there weren't many places on the ordinary floors that were risky enough for Yeon-woo. Perhaps the ones above the 60th floor might pose some danger and make Yeon-woo more cautious, but even still, the focus was on completing trials, and he wouldn't get the same number of battle experiences. It was a different story in Tartarus. This was a battlefield where divine beings clashed with each other. Even the foot soldiers were stronger than the players on the higher floors. Tartarus was the perfect place for Yeon-woo, and the longer he stayed, the more complete the Skywings became. The left wing, keyword, death, of Skywings has activated. Death has settled on the vast battlefield. 6,712 Titan subordinates have died. 591 Titan subordinates have died. A new power has been added to the right wing, keyword, fight, of Skywings. Added power, SLR Lang Shen's Dragon Kill, Audad's E Karkara. Vimalasitra nods because you are using his power properly. Agar's thrashes around saying not to touch what belongs to him. All gods ignore him. All demons ignore him. Agar's grips the back of his neck, grinding his teeth. A message from Agar's has arrived. Message, get rid of those idiots. What's so fun about showing off your talents in front of them? A message from Agar's has arrived. Message, take more of my powers and factors. Agar's messages have been temporarily blocked with your authorization. Multiple gods watch you. Multiple demons drool after you. A few gods envy you. They begin to spread malicious rumors about you. A few demons are anxious their positions might be jeopardized. The discussion about your level is still ongoing. There hasn't been a consensus, so it continues to be extended. Please wait a moment. He could now maintain Skywings for about 40 seconds, and the Spirit Gui were improving at a quick pace as they took in more fine souls. Collected souls, 312,456. The size of his collection had increased 3 times. Souls followed the path Yeon-woo took, creating an unapproachable territory. Needless to say, the titans and giants wouldn't leave him be. Kill him through any means possible? For the mighty Cronus? Giant gods, including the 12 original titans, set up their defenses and fought close battles. However, now that Hades' holy power was taking an active part in the battles, Pluto had the upper hand as the intense clashes went back and forth. The 6th holy territory, Byewangji, has been successfully raided. With the 6th light column descending, they were finally able to complete the connection with Olympus. You've done well so far. On the day they raided the 6th holy territory, Hades summoned the exhausted Yeon-woo for a private meeting. Yeon-woo was covered in blood and unidentifiable pieces of flesh after his long battle. His aura was still so violent that it was hard to imagine that he was here to show respect to a god. However, Hades didn't mind since this was all in the service of Pluto, and in fact, Hades actually liked such appearances. As someone who had lived on the battlefield and defeated the titans and giants in his youth to become their gatekeeper when he grew older, he preferred warlike appearances over the clean ones of those who rested in the back rooms. He felt like he was looking at his younger self. Yeon-woo instinctively knew that the day he'd been waiting for had finally arrived. Sudden quest, Persephone's long-held wish, completed. Hidden Quest, Temple Restoration, completed. Hidden Quest, Hero who stood against an ancient god, completed. He had completed quests that he hadn't even known about. You have gained. He scrolled down the list of mediocre items and found the reward he'd been searching for at the bottom. You have gained Hades' great holy artifact Cunning as a reward. As I promised you at the start, I will give this to you. Hades slowly descended from his throne and gave Yeon-woo a black helm. It looked like a common bronze helm, but Yeon-woo had seen what Hades appeared like when he wore it. The battle to raid Beowangji, the sixth holy territory, had been a rough one that Pluto had bet the entire house on. 7 of the 12 titans had shown up, and so many of their subordinates rained down that it seemed they would swallow up the world. It would end up being one of the most memorable battles Pluto had fought in 100 years. In the middle of the pandemonium, Hades stepped into the battlefield wearing Cunning for the first time. Everything died. Since he'd regained his holy power and reclaimed his artifact, Hades finally exercised his strength as a god. Giant gods died with every swing of his sword. Tartarus shook to the point of collapse. There was no way that any of the minor subordinates would survive the attack. It was a show of power that demonstrated Hades' status as the oldest of the Olympus and explained how he managed to take Tartarus by himself, and with Cunning on, Hades grew even more frightening. It was no exaggeration to say he was responsible for 80% of the success at Beowangji. It is a bit strange that Typhon and the other giants didn't appear, though. Since they had yet to show their faces, Hades probably needed Cunning more than ever, but he gave it to Yeon-woo without any hesitation. As Yeon-woo watched him approach, it suddenly occurred to him that although Hades was a godly being with a terrifying might on the battlefield, he wasn't that much taller than himself. Don't you need this, sir? Hades grinned. Even though the situation had improved, the cynical smile hadn't left his face. Is a player concerned for a god? How funny. I only needed the symbolism of the holy artifact, and the legends that come from it. I have everything I need, so you can take it. Yeon-woo didn't understand everything, but since Hades seemed not to have any use for Cunning anymore, he accepted. Thank you. I should be the one thanking you. Our soldiers are in high spirits thanks to your efforts. If not for your assistance, Tartarus would have crumbled long ago. It was still a cold voice, but Yeon-woo could hear Hades' gratitude. Yeon-woo was rubbing Cunning when Cunning and the despair of the Black King suddenly started to shake. Hades looked at the two items with rueful eyes for a brief moment and silently returned to his throne. Since you have what you want, you will be returning to the stage, correct? Tartarus would change to the battlefield of legends once it was successfully connected to Olympus. Hades and the others would probably search for the hidden titans and giants. Yeon-woo's party didn't have any further roles to play since they were little more than shrimp in a battle among whales. Moreover, Olympus wasn't entirely friendly to Yeon-woo. Anyway, that bastard Poseidon is probably furiously searching for you. He's just a sore loser. Hades judged his little brother with disapproval and waved his hand at Yeon-woo, allowing him to leave. Yeon-woo bowed and stepped back. Suddenly, for some reason, it felt like he was saying his last goodbyes to Hades. Cain, is this? Yes. It's Cunning. Yeon-woo returned to the temple square where his party was resting. They had been celebrating their grand victory with drinks, and their faces were all red. Khan saw Cunning in Yeon-woo's hand and his eyes widened. He was surprised to see Yeon-woo finally get hold of the item he had been longing for all this time. This meant they were done with this dreary war and could return to the stage. It looks quite different like that. Kreutz looked at Cunning with a curious expression. Now that he'd been through several life-or-death situations with the party, he was now regarded as a comrade. The master blacksmiths Victoria and Brahm sat down, and Doyle and Galliard returned from socializing with the other soldiers. The pocket watch inside Yeon-woo's breast pocket shook like it was excited. Yeon-woo was a bit uncomfortable at the attention he was receiving, but he took a deep breath and looked at Cunning. The despair and grief of the Black King trembled as one. Swoosh! Then, Cunning scattered into fine particles and whirled around to gather at Yeon-woo's neck. Chapter 381 Gigantomachia, 6. Clank, clank. The chains grew into a black band around Yeon-woo's neck, thick enough to appear like a pillory although it was more like a necklace. You have earned the fury of the Black King. Yeon-woo could feel the heavy weight as he checked the information window. Fury of the Black King. Category, Armor. Rank. Description. This is a unique artifact. No other artifact like this exists in the tower, and it will be bound to its owner. It cannot be transferred or traded between players. All information is sealed. You must meet the qualifications or conditions in order to view the information. Just as I thought. It was just like the time he'd received the grief of the Black King. He hadn't satisfied the conditions and couldn't read anything about it. He had managed to unlock the grief in the span of a day. But there was no guarantee he would be that lucky again this time. This is Cunning. Hanova walked over with a pipe in his mouth and tapped lightly on Yeon-woo's pillory. Clink. Hanova's eyes narrowed at the clear, ringing sound. He was one of the best blacksmiths in the tower, and he immediately recognized that the pillory wasn't made of any common metal. He breathed out smoke and turned his head. Cyclops, this is divine iron? It's an item made to bind an extraordinarily strong criminal. But, why is this so familiar? Hanova's shadow stretched out, and the Cyclops Brontes and Sterapes appeared, looking at the pillory thoughtfully. For the past few days, they had been following Hanova around to fix Pluto's weapons and share their knowledge with him. Right now, it's called Fury of the Black King. Fury. Hanova's eyes widened and he clucked his tongue. Despair, grief, and now fury? Seems the original owner went through a lot. This isn't your everyday. Hanova trailed off at the stiff expression on Brontes and Sterapes' faces. Black King? I see. That's why? They trembled as though they were frightened but also relieved and joyful to have found the answer to a difficult puzzle. But when they turned back to Yeon-woo, their eyes were solemn. If you're his descendant, then it makes sense that you managed to bind us, even though we were once divine beings. So that's why. The sins we committed in the past have returned to chain us up like this? It appears so. As the two sighed, Yeon-woo asked, what do you mean? The cast you're wearing was made by us, or rather, we assisted in its creation? Yeon-woo's eyes widened. Hanova and the other members of the party didn't know how to react since the conversation had lost them by now, but they were sure of one thing. If these three blacksmiths, who once created weapons for 3 of the Olympians, had assisted in creating the cast, it was most definitely more phenomenal than a great artifact. How did we fail to recognize it? A lot of time has passed, but, is it because the item has been worn down as well? Bronte's voice seemed somewhat rueful. Please tell me about it. Those 3 casts were our masters, number, Zeus? Brontes frowned. Number. As expected, I cannot even speak about him. Just as Yeon-woo's name was blurred out by the system, the master Brontes was speaking about was also garbled. Yeon-woo's eyes flashed. Is it because of the pledge of the sticks? It's something like that. It seems like Lord Zeus has placed a lock on the word. I don't know how much we can say about him. Anyway, the casts that bound the Black King were created at Zeus' request. We used all the divine iron in Tartarus and Erebus. It was remarkable. Bronte's eyes narrowed. I didn't expect it to shrink to this size. Can you tell me about the situation back then? The pocket watch trembled. The more secrets Yeon-woo uncovered about the Black King, the closer he would get to resurrecting Jeong-woo. You know very well that a pledge of the sticks cannot be broken easily. Yeon-woo clenched his fist. The Black King's power was always above the features of the system, but it seemed there were limits to its abilities. Did he have to give up here? However, Yeon-woo waited. I can tell you this much. After the Black King was confined to the void, the ranking in Olympus shifted. You'll be able to learn more if you look into the reasons behind the protagonist's fall and the banishment of the Titans and Giants. Suddenly, sparks exploded from Bronte's body. I see even the system limits even this much? Bronte's forehead wrinkled as his body began fading. If he spoke any further about the subject, his soul would most likely be crushed by the pledge of the Styx. However, the information was shocking enough for Yeon-woo. It meant the Titanomachia and Gigantomachia was related to the Black King. And it's related to the protagonist, too. He was flustered that traces of the Black King could be connected to the Elohim and the descendants of the former divine species like Ether and Panath. Do you know anything about this? Yeon-woo rubbed the pocket watch and Jeong-woo's thoughts were delivered through his fingertips. Not really. There wasn't anything in the special benefit, at least. I'm surprised, too. Yeon-woo narrowed his eyes. Then is the only option to invade the Elohim. He had a reason to climb the floors again. Just then, Kreutz, who had been silently listening to the conversation, spoke up with sparkling eyes. If you're planning on leaving Tartarus, when do you think you'll do it? He wanted the regiment leader and Yeon-woo to meet as soon as possible. After observing Yeon-woo for so long, he was sure that they needed to have Yeon-woo as an ally. He was a natural leader. It was clear as water that walking with Yeon-woo would someday lead to a war with the 8 clans, which could put the fantasy regiment in danger as well, but Kreutz wanted to know where Yeon-woo's path led. Khan and Doyle looked at Yeon-woo with curious expressions as well. All that was left was to connect the stairs to Olympus. Since Yeon-woo had already received Cunning, they knew their tasks were done. As soon as the Feng Shan ceremony is over. Khan looked at Yeon-woo strangely. But won't that be dangerous? If the gods of Olympus descend, Poseidon will stop at nothing to kill you. Yeon-woo only snorted at the thought. Tell them to go ahead if they want to give me more factors. This was Hades' territory. No matter how reckless they might be, there were limits to what they could do. It was unlikely the other gods would only observe, too. In fact, Yeon-woo was thinking that this was an opportunity for him to finally meet Poseidon. Also, he trailed off. A faraway gaze was focused on him from someone whom he wanted to meet in person, too. Athena looks at you. Athena had been observing from the time Jeong-woo started in the tower's tutorial to the current moment. He had a lot to ask her. Lady Persephone hopes to catch you before you go and thank you. She says she wants to reward us for helping Hades as well. The rest of the party members nodded at Doyle's explanation. No player would refuse a reward, especially if it was given by a god. Just then, Lam's voice rang out in the temple. We're starting the Feng Shan ceremony 2 hours from now. They were finally about to connect Olympus and Tartarus. Yeon-woo put down his drink and slowly stood up. Typhon! Typhon! Thud, thud, thud. Footsteps echoed in the fancy hall. Boom! It was a holy location that required everyone to behave in a respectful manner, but Iapetos pushed the door at the end of the hall open in a vexed manner. What is it, Iapetos? There was a large magic square on the marble floor inside the room. The edges of the complex magic square were ringed with candles which illuminated the dark room. In the center of the square, Typhon quietly opened his eyes. Although his gigantic eyes had loomed in the sky over everyone, his physical body was smaller than those of ordinary people, and his face was covered with messy hair, making it difficult to see his features. It was difficult to believe that he was the king of the giants, who once threatened Olympus and nearly took over Tartarus. His appearance only added to Iapetos' rage. Are you serious? Iapetos seemed to be ready to kill Typhon at any minute. 6 have died because you didn't step up. 6. My brothers. While that good-for-nothing Hades was killing them, neither you nor the giants appeared. What in the world are you thinking? Iapetos had stood on the front lines for the entire of the war. Allies was only a nice way of saying that they were essentially the giant's subordinates. Still, he had never complained. Even if he lost his fellow titans and subordinates, it was worth it if they could take over Tartarus, invade Olympus, and restore his power. However, when the backup he expected from Typhon and the giants hadn't materialized at the Battle of Buwangji, the titans lost 70% of their precious forces. And yet Typhon looked at Iapetos without an ounce of apology. Something snapped in Iapeto's head, and he tried to run at Typhon. "That's enough. You are forbidden from approaching any closer." A man and a woman suddenly appeared from the side and prevented Iapeto's approach. They were Gratian and Mimas, the right and left hands of Typhon. Iapetos attempted to use his holy power to push them away, but before Gratian and Mimas could move, Iapetos' shadow suddenly lengthened over the ground and tightened around its owner like a coil of rope. Irk! Iapetos was forced to his knees. The more he struggled to tear the shadow ropes, the tighter it wrapped around him. "Iapetos, do not forget our plan. We belong in Olympus, not Tartarus. You know that we need divine blood as a sacrifice to distract the Olympians." "You titans agreed, too. You didn't say they would die." "They haven't died. They've just returned to Cronus. As long the queen is with us, death is a blessing. Why don't you understand that yet, you fool?" Typhon said in a cold voice. "The queen will arrive at the temple soon. We'll march under her flag and take it. We'll complete what Cronus couldn't." Iapetos screamed, but no amount of shouting would make his brothers return. Typhon watched him silently. Unlike the complicated battles and preparations before the Fengshan ceremony to connect Olympus and Tartarus, the ceremony itself was quite simple. As he stood before an altar within a light column, Hades looked at the sky and said a single word. "Open." It was a command filled with his newly restored holy power. It moved the system of the tower and released the constraints between the floors of the heavenly world and the lower world. Rumble. It sounded like a large, heavy door was creaking open, and suddenly, the red sky over Tartarus widened as shooting stars came raining down. Yeon-woo could feel multiple channels around him become clearer, as though they were growing closer. He felt as though he were being surrounded, and then there was a sudden explosion of light in front of his eyes. Boom! A dampness whirled around like a storm. His friends and Pluto lost their balance and fell over. A large trident trembled in front of Yeon-woo, but it had been blocked by something. An intense pressure nearly swallowed Yeon-woo and shook the atmosphere. Yeon-woo didn't blink an eye as he looked at the blue-haired man in front of him. "You." Poseidon thrust his trident forward with a scowl, but he couldn't get too far. Hermes and Athena were blocking the trident with a cane and sword respectively, as if protecting Yeon-woo. Chapter 382. Gigantomachia, 7. "Enough, uncle." Athena's eyes flashed. Although the expression in her eyes whenever she looked at Yeon-woo and Jeong-woo was usually gentle and kind, at the moment, their expression was so sharp that it seemed as though they could cut through Poseidon. Poseidon scowled as he looked at his impudent niece who was always interfering in his business. She had never encountered the Black King, but she was supporting Yeon-woo even though it wasn't a power that a mortal ought to have. However, his niece wasn't one to listen, no matter how much he scolded her. Poseidon could no longer stay silent about her interference. "You dare stop me?" It didn't matter that she was his niece. "If you don't move, fine. I'll kill both of you." He released his pressure, and Pluto quickly escaped the storm that began whirling around them. Athena's and Hermes' face stiffened. The pressure emanating from the three greater divine beings was so powerful that it created a typhoon. Just when it seemed like the temple of the king of the underworld would be shaken from its foundation, Hades growled from his position by the altar, "Poseidon." With a frown, he let his holy power burst out, furious that his brother had the nerve to cause a ruckus in his territory. Rumble. Black lightning shot from the sky and the ground shook all the way to its depths. This was his holy territory, and Tartarus was his land. His strength was reflected in his territory, and an intense pressure surrounded everyone. The faces of the gods by the altar paled. They had counted on having the upper hand since they were arriving as Tartarus backup, and they were only now just realizing what kind of being Hades had been like during the Gigantomachia and Titanomachia. He had nearly been forgotten after he left the heavenly world to rule over the underworld, but in the past, he was a domineering tyrant that even Zeus had to bend to. Hades especially couldn't stand being dishonored. You dare raise your weapons in my territory without my permission? Should I take it that you want to become my enemy? Rumble. The black lightning grew fiercer with every word he spoke. However, Poseidon was also an Olympian, and he stood his ground with a frown. Brother! Did you forget what kind of entity the Black King was? We risked our lives to pull him down after we barely managed to defeat Cronus. But how? Before Poseidon could finish, dozens of condensed lightning bolts fell in front of him. Roar! He stepped back in surprise. Hades' eyes glittered dangerously. I'm warning you for the last time, put that trident down. The child in front of you is my friend and guest. It was evident that Hades wouldn't let Poseidon do as he pleased. When Poseidon still didn't move, Hades put his hand on the sword at his waist. The gods of Olympus looked on anxiously. If Hades and Poseidon fought, everything would be over. They were already at a disadvantage despite combining all their forces. An internal fight would only benefit the titans and giants. The problem was that both Hades and Poseidon were prideful and would never give up. However, Poseidon eventually moved his trident to the side in fury. Damn it! He blew away a section of the holy territory, but his whirling pressure was reined in once more. Still, he continued to fume, and the atmosphere was still tense. He turned to look at Yeon-woo with a glower. You got lucky this time. I'll never forget how you humiliated me today. An intense pressure weighed down on Yeon-woo's shoulders. Ordinary players would have passed out or seen their souls crushed, but Yeon-woo only smirked in response. It was pathetic to see a divine being acting like a stubborn child. As you wish. You. Veins bulged on Poseidon's temples. For a moment, he considered getting rid of Yeon-woo even if it meant fighting Hades, but he forced himself to keep calm. If he used all his power, he could easily kill Yeon-woo, but Yeon-woo wouldn't go down without a fight. He was a player who had killed a god before, and the process wouldn't be that easy. In the end, Poseidon managed to hold himself back with preternatural effort and turned around. The gods following him hesitated and left after bowing to Hermes and Athena, then glaring at Yeon-woo, Hestia, Hera, and Demeter among them. Athena only put her sword away after Poseidon and the others were completely out of sight. However, the sharp combative aura around her remained. Hermes chuckled at his sister. Do you know something, sister? What? Athena wondered what her mischievous brother was trying to pull this time and narrowed her eyes. Hermes continued to smile playfully despite her sharp gaze. If you only ever show this violent side, any guys interested in you will be scared away. Belatedly realizing her mistake, Athena quickly regained her composure, but it was too late. Yeon-woo was already staring at her. Thank you for helping me. Athena nodded in a slightly flustered manner. You acted like you had a lot to say when you finally met him. See, I was right, Hermes' voice suddenly rang in her ear. She recalled how Hermes had giggled at her as she anxiously watched Yeon-woo's reunion with Jeong-woo. What did he say back then? Something about not knowing what to say when she was finally in front of him? At the time, she told him to stop speaking nonsense, but it was just as Hermes said. She was so taken aback that she was dumbstruck. The child that she had been watching over now knew all of the past incidents surrounding his brother and all the other occurrences related to it. Athena couldn't bring herself to speak because she was worried that Yeon-woo still resented her. I'll leave so you two can talk? Hermes smiled slyly and disappeared after winking at Yeon-woo. Athena wanted to slap his face, but she stopped herself. Are you hurt? She'd carefully contemplated what to say, but the words that actually popped out were so stupid. She wanted to smack herself on the mouth, especially since she was supposed to be the goddess of wisdom. "I'm fine, thanks to you." "That's a relief." "Yes." There was an awkward moment of silence between them. The onlookers wondered what had happened and stared with wide eyes. Time difference. Suddenly, the world excluding Yeon-woo and Athena, slowed down. Yeon-woo had sped up his speed of thought, and as he intended, Athena was able to follow. It was a quiet environment for the two of them to speak, like a private bubble within the noise around them. Just then, the pocket watch spun and Jeong-woo's spirit body slowly slid out. He looked at the goddess who had watched over him for a long time. So that's what she looks like? That was Jeong-woo's first thought. It was his first time to see Athena, but she seemed so familiar, especially the eyes that looked so sadly at him. They were the same eyes that had supported him until the end. Seeing Athena for the first time. "Thank you." Jeong-woo could finally express his gratitude. It was something he'd wanted to do for a long time. Athena's eyes quivered from his unexpected words. "You're the only one who protected me until the end, Athena?" Athena pressed her lips together. However, Jeong-woo was smiling brightly. "Of course, I resented you, too. You've watched me from the beginning but you never showed yourself like this. I felt uncomfortable because you only ever watched me, and I was hoping that you would help me in the end when I was grasping at straws." Jeong-woo recalled the message that popped up right before he closed his eyes. It was something about an unrevealed god watching him with sad eyes. That message repeatedly popped up in his special benefit as well, and it became almost predictable. In a way, being watched like this was an unpleasant experience, but at the same time, he was grateful that she'd stayed by his side until the end. "Whenever I closed my eyes, I always had the same thought, it's not so lonely, and there's someone who's always watching me." Technically, Athena had no reason to help Jeong-woo. All she had done was peek at the future and show her pity. It wasn't as if she could interfere either. The tower's fixed system blocked the interference of the heavenly world in the name of the laws of causality. Also, Athena had done her best to help Yeon-woo and Jeong-woo after that. "Thank you, for saying that." Athena wiped her eyes with a faint smile, although tears continued to brim in her eyes. She had been wondering what to say when she finally met the brothers, and she was grateful that they'd spoken first. As he looked at her, Jeong-woo thought of how fragile she was, even though she was a goddess. He'd always felt it from the way she'd looked at him with sad eyes, but it was clear to him now that she was even more fragile than he'd believed. How could such a delicate person be the goddess of war and wisdom? When she had confronted Poseidon, she seemed like a steady ally, but now, she seemed like an older sister who lived next door. Jeong-woo was reminded of his mother, and he instinctively spread his wings and took a step closer to Athena. They were close enough to feel each other's breath. Athena took a step back unconsciously. No man had ever stood so close to her before. Normally, she would have brushed him away, but when she looked into his pure eyes, she lost the will to rebuff him. Instead, she felt surprised. Then, Jeong-woo hugged Athena lightly, as if reassuring her that everything was all right. At first, she was stunned, then she realized that he was trying to comfort her with his warmth. She nodded graciously. "Do you know you can be punished heavily for touching a god's body without permission?" After a while, Athena pushed Jeong-woo away, pouting with embarrassment. Although she was pretending to be strict, she just seemed cute. "Ha ha ha! Are you really the goddess of war? You seem to have a lot of tears?" Jeong-woo found himself bursting into laughter, making Athena's pout grow bigger. Jeong-woo realized that Yeon-woo was staring at him and tilted his head. "What?" Yeon-woo shook his head. "Nothing. I was just wondering what face Cha and Ananta would make if they saw you like this." Jeong-woo couldn't reply. "Or maybe if I said something to Brahm." "That's not what this is?" Athena smiled as she watched the brothers squabble. She could see herself and Hermes in them. Really, they were quite adorable. Then, Yeon-woo pushed away the noisy Jeong-woo with his hand and he locked eyes with Athena, who had a warm expression on her face. "Can I ask you something?" The reunion was over. It was time to ask her what he'd always wanted to know. "Yes." Athena's eyes widened slightly, and she nodded stiffly. She had an idea of what he wanted to know. "If I'm correct, you foresaw something when Jeong-woo first entered the tutorial." Athena hesitated, then nodded heavily and said, "Correct." "It was quite short, though." "Just as I thought." Yeon-woo muttered to himself. He asked another question. "Were Jeong-woo and I in that vision?" "Yes." "What happened to us?" Athena hesitated and replied with a sigh. "Before that, let me correct one thing. The vision I saw was of you, but not the both of you." It was a confusing answer that made the brothers' eyes widen. "What does that mean?" Athena's face hardened. "There was only one person." Chapter 383. Gigantomachia, 8. Whoa, look at their auras. They're truly warlike. The Titans were one thing, but Olympus is another. I suppose gods are gods. Only when the gods of Olympus stepped away did Khan and the others manage to catch their breaths. Khan was slightly exaggerating, but the others still nodded. Olympus is a pantheon of many, so they're one of the largest societies along with Deva, Chan sect, and Asgard. Since they're the heads of a society like that, it's natural for their auras to be so impressive. Brahm grinned, reminiscing about his time in the heavenly world. Olympus was considered one of the most troublesome places in the heavenly world. They interfered in the lower world the most frequently and saw the most incidents. It was also the place where the biggest shift in generations had occurred. It seemed like their tradition was still being passed down. It had only been a short while, but the gods of Olympus clearly moved in two rival groups, the old gods with Poseidon and Hera versus the young gods centered around Hermes. A few of them wandered around trying not to take sides, but most gods associated with one group were hesitant to approach those in the other group. Even more telling, the gods who were more powerful didn't even glance at the other group. It clearly meant that the conflict between the generations had gone past the point of no return. I heard it became more extreme after Zeus fell into a slumber. I guess the rumors were true. Brahm was sick of the heavenly world, but he sometimes took an interest in noisy Olympus. One thing hadn't changed throughout the years, their arrogance. They had some interest in Yeon-woo, who had caused an uproar in the heavenly world, but they didn't even look at the other players. Some openly frowned as though they found it distressing to even breathe the same air. To this day, the ones at the top haven't changed. Brahm snorted at the gods of Olympus and glanced at Yeon-woo. Most people hadn't noticed it, but Brahm knew through his connection with Yeon-woo that he and Athena had conversed about something. Although he didn't eavesdrop because it was a private conversation, something kept nagging at him. It's a bit weird. Numerous gods and demons had lavished attention on Yeon-woo, but he'd had the most contact with Olympus from the Black King, who likely had a connection to Olympus, the blessings of Hermes and Athena, and his bad blood with Poseidon to the two legendary beasts named after gods in Olympus and the battle in Tartarus. Since a player's worth was determined by the accomplishments registered in the system, it wasn't wise to keep such a close connection with one place like this unless you were an apostle. Brahm was concerned that Yeon-woo would be swept up in the disorder of Olympus. Yeon-woo had told everyone to get ready to leave because they would depart Tartarus after his business with Athena was finished, but the laws of causality couldn't be brushed away that easily. Smack! Brahm shut the book he had been reading and pulled out a bamboo container from within his breast pocket. He hadn't wanted to use it unless as a last resort, but he was feeling too frustrated. At the noise, Galliard, who was next to him, tilted his head. "What's that? I've never seen it before." "Tools of divination." "Divination? You don't believe in that stuff." "I don't discount it either." "What do you want to see?" "Events in the future." With that reply, Brahm silently pulled out a bamboo stick. There was a mysterious letter at the end of it that only Brahm could read. Inauspicious. In fact, it wasn't just inauspicious, it was greatly inauspicious. What does it say? Nothing, nothing. Brahm put the bamboo stick back, controlling his facial expression to the best of his abilities. However, he felt like his heart had dropped to the soles of his feet. It was a rarely seen ill omen. What happened? Were Yeon-woo and Olympus not suited to each other? He shook the container several times and pulled out more sticks, but the same results appeared: great inauspiciousness. Nothing good would come from associating with Olympus. I should tell Yeon-woo that we need to leave quickly. Staying here would only bring misfortune. Just then, Yeon-woo appeared, on his way back to them. Brahm started to move forward, then he suddenly paused. Although Yeon-woo's expression was hidden behind his mask, Brahm had a feeling that Yeon-woo's face was tense. Their connection shook from Yeon-woo's intense emotions. What's wrong? Did something happen? Brahm. Yeon-woo said hesitantly, how likely do the visions of gods become reality? The question was completely unexpected, and Brahm realized that something must have happened during Yeon-woo's conversation with Athena, probably the revelation of premonitions or prophecies. Those didn't always bring good results for gods and demons. If it's not someone who has precognition as their domain, they can sometimes be inaccurate. Precognition doesn't come from one solid outcome, it's a result of multiple processes. It's not unusual for people to force different bits together to make sense of it all. Precognition and prophecies were thorny matters. There had been times when those in Olympus or Deva had tried to struggle against their prophesied fates and make other decisions, only to end up with the same results. Precognition could be considered a superficial view of the likeliest possible future according to the laws of causality. Brahm believed in them since he had once been a higher god. Then, if there's a picture or drawing of you, Galliard, Shay, and Ananta sitting together. Suddenly, Brahm recalled a vision he'd had before he lost his holiness. He had seen 5 people smiling together, but why did he suddenly remember it now? That last person was, never mind. I think I said something I shouldn't have. Yeon-woo shook his head. However, Athena's rueful voice was still ringing in his head, but I wasn't able to see who that last person was, even though I saw it with the eyes of a god. I ended up telling him. But I don't know if this will bring fortune, misfortune, or something completely different. Athena slowly walked in silence to the temple where the gods of Olympus waited. Had it been 7 or 8 years ago? She never expected that a split-second image she'd seen would bring someone like her, who'd already lived thousands of years, so much agony. At the time, she had been looking for pieces of the Black King in the lower world. The Black King was a necessary beginning for her, Hermes, and their brothers who dreamed of the same thing. The only thing they had going for them was a prophecy that they would someday appear in the lower world. Fortunately, Poseidon and the others didn't trust the prophecy, and Athena could find them before they did. At that moment, she had been hit with an intense feeling that something was appearing in the tutorial. The tutorial wasn't of any interest to the gods of Olympus, but when she turned around, she saw Jeong-woo, a novice who'd received an invitation to participate in the tower. He had talent, but his body and abilities were a mess, and he wasn't even among the most basic of players. She thought he would die in Section A or retire from fear, but she found herself watching him again and again. The player she thought would die early steadily progressed. He saved his friends and sometimes made deals, and sometimes, he pulled at Athena's heartstrings. In the end, when he graduated with a high ranking, she screamed in joy. She had always blessed heroes, and Jeong-woo was a child who could become one. Then, she realized that this child was a key related to the Black King and that he would face a tragic end. 3 different visions had flashed past her eyes. She'd wanted to change each one of them, but 2 had already come to pass, Jeong-woo's death and Yeon-woo's awakening. And now, there was one final vision left. Athena didn't know what would happen after telling them. Precognition only showed a specific result, not the events that led up to it, how it could be avoided. Even though she was a goddess, she couldn't even say for sure if it was a certainty. The person smiling in the final vision looked like it could be either Yeon-woo or Jeong-woo. Perhaps it was just a snapshot of a moment where one of the brothers happened to be occupied somewhere else. Perhaps she was just making a big deal out of nothing, but Athena knew she couldn't be complacent. When she reached the center of the temple, she found Hermes leaning on a column with his arms crossed instead of waiting for her inside, as she'd expected. "What are you doing here?" "Obviously, I'm waiting for my sister." "Me?" Athena's forehead wrinkled. "What are you planning this time? You make it sound like I live to annoy you. That makes me upset." "You don't?" "Well, guess I can't deny it." Hermes snickered. Athena immediately moved her hand to her sword, annoyed with her brother's behavior ever since they arrived in Tartarus. Using his holy artifact, Hermes prudently created some distance between them, pretending to be scared. "Hey! Let's use words, okay? Do you know what peace means?" "Peace, my ass! Did you already forget what I rule over?" "Geez, you know when father thinks words are pointless and reaches for his sword." "Ka-shing! Good thing you're totally different." "Woo! How could I compare our simple-minded and irresponsible dad to you?" Right. Clank. Athena pushed her sword back into its sheath. "With number. From your expression, it looks like things went well. Need I ask?" "Then what?" "Because of that." Hermes pointed at the temple. Its door and windows were wide open, revealing what was going on inside. Although there was the possibility that important information might be leaked as the gods spoke, no one had the courage to approach the gods of Olympus. However, thanks to the view, Athena could observe the loud arguments inside the temple. "Are you going to give the power of the Black King to a mortal? You know better than anyone else what kind of power it is. It can't be done." Poseidon shouted as he burst up from his seat, his face as red as a tomato. Hades merely smiled coldly, still seated. "I already gave him Cunning. I believe that's enough of an answer." "Hades!" Boom! Poseidon punched the table, losing his temper. His beard trembled, and his eyes filled with shock and disbelief. The other gods of Olympus listening were just as stunned, from Hestia, Hera, and Demeter to Nereus, Doris, Limos, Dike, and Eunomia, who had come in support of Poseidon. Even gods like Apollo, Artemis, and Dionysus, who were on Athena's side, seemed shocked. Zeus' Astrap and Poseidon's Triana had been forcefully absorbed because they lacked holy power, but Cunning was a different matter entirely. Giving a great holy artifact like Cunning meant that Hades had betrayed the pledge of the past and sided with the player Yeon-woo. From a certain perspective, it meant that Yeon-woo was closer to him than Lam was. The issue was complicated further by the fact that it was an item that had been recreated with much difficulty after already being destroyed once. A holy artifact was the symbol of the legend of a divine being. Hades had given his future to Yeon-woo. "You mean you're already surprised by something like this?" Hades crossed his legs, resting his chin in his palm. A corner of his mouth lifted in a cynical manner. "If I say I plan on giving that child the cumbersome title of King of the Underworld once he attains a divine level, that will completely appall you then." The others froze at Hades' sudden bombshell. Chapter 384. Gigantomachia, 9. "Are you serious?" Poseidon was the first to collect his wits. His face had not only turned red, but he was trembling in rage from head to toe. He had been trying to keep his composure since he was in Hades' territory, but he had reached the end of his patience. Of course, Hades wasn't one to care. "Don't shout, Poseidon. No one here is deaf." Hades' smile deepened. "Didn't you say he's a mere mortal? How ironic. Since you've been bested by that mere mortal several times, what does it make you? A loser? Idiot? Something along those lines. Don't mock me. Mock? If speaking the truth is mocking you, I'll do it to no end. Hades dropped his right hand from under his chin and straightened his back. The same goes for the rest of you. His eyes swept over the rest of the gods, which included Hestia, Hera, Demeter, and their sub-deities. It was pathetic that an internal conflict had risen within Olympus all because of the Black King. A lot of time has already passed. Why can't you fools let it go? The past is already the past. You don't have to pay attention to it. Why are you so obsessed? Because the past is not simply the past. Hera shot up from her seat to defend their position. As Zeus' wife and the Queen of Olympus, she had the right to speak as much as the three brothers, since she had been ruling over Olympus in their stead. Then what is it? It was our identity. One that allowed simple shepherds like us to sit on the thrones of Olympus. After Cronus had been brought down, the Black King was trapped in the void, stripped of his power. Not long after, they managed to gain Olympus. But if the Black King rose once more, it would mean that the ember that they believed had already died would ignite again. It was a root that needed to be pulled up before it could grow. However, Hades snorted as though they were being unreasonable. We are stronger now and rule over more superior domains compared to the time of the war. We have the throne and our influence. Even if Cronus were resurrected because of the Black King's return, he would have little of his previous power. They won't be able to break down the stronghold we built, will they? Hera pressed her lips together. Technically, Hades was right. They had brought the Black King down at a time before the tower system had established its current structure. It had been a turbulent time with many fights, and those who occupied the throne changed from one day to the next. The old godly tribes of the Elohim, such as the Protogenoi and the Vanir, had lost their power during those uncertain times. High elves, fallen angels, and half-demons were among those that suffered. It was only after the confusion had settled down that multiple societies of gods and demons finally took shape and stabilized the heavenly world. After the system was established and eons passed, the heavenly world became steady, and a few gods and demons remained part of the system, expanding the influence of the tower. The tower grew larger in scale and accepted new players every day. The gods and demons grew in direct proportion to this. The Black King was a great being of the past who existed at the beginning of the universe, ruling over darkness, death, and chaos, which was why the gods of Olympus feared him. But now that the order of the universe had been settled, Hades believed that Olympus no longer had any reason to fear him. Perhaps we could bring the Black King back as an ally against that cowardly Gaia. Hades' words made an odd light shine in the eyes of Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, and Athena, the younger generation. Unlike the old-fashioned older generation, it was clear they believed the Black King was necessary. So that it won't just be a bunch of fools from Olympus, Hades muttered to himself. Then, he asked Poseidon another question. Or perhaps you don't have the confidence to defend the throne you're sitting on. Is your position that low? You. Of course, I don't think any of you will change your minds just because of my words. Gods were self-righteous and narrow-minded, they continued on the path they believed was right. Hades observed that even though they had brought Cronus down, they were behaving just like Cronus had in the first place. It was part of the reason why Hades had volunteered to descend to Tartarus in the past. He didn't want to be associated with such fools. I will also move forward with my decision. Once that child sheds his skin and actualizes the Black King, I shall promote him to this position, so stop with your complaining. The position Hades occupied was essentially the Black King's, and it seemed fair to return it to its original owner. Poseidon could only glare at Hades, realizing that he couldn't convince him. Do you think that bastard will gain divine power? Why not? Hades recalled the Wing of Death and the Wing of Fight that Yeon-woo had used in the war. Death originated from the Black King, but fighting didn't. It was entirely the child's possession. His accomplishments were already being recorded in history, and when he received the chance, it wouldn't take much for them to be turned into legends. It's something that hasn't occurred in thousands of years, ever since the tower was erected. Even Alforoni couldn't gain a divine level, but you're saying that bastard will? Nonsense. That's not the entire truth, and you know it. Alforoni hasn't become a divine being out of his own choice, and even if there were dozens of you, you wouldn't be able to defeat Alforoni. Poseidon clenched his fists at the additional humiliation he received from his brother. His veins pulsed as if they would explode any minute, and he was holding back with preternatural effort. Regardless, Hades continued to ruffle Poseidon's feathers as if it didn't matter to him whether Poseidon became angry or not. The same goes for the other players. Have you taken a proper look at the lower world? There are over 10 players who are ready to ascend to a divine level and shed their skins. A few of them are powerful enough to become higher divine beings, but they haven't been able to accomplish it. Do you know why? It was related to what Yeon-woo had been curious about. Why were the generals of Dis Pluto at the same level as or even below the 9 kings even though they were divine beings? Why did Astrius die? The answer was simple. Alforoni has completely cut off the heavenly world from the lower world, forcing the system's functions to pause. There is no way players that are bound to it can become divine beings. No one could speak at first. Does that mean you believe if that child number can avoid Alforoni, he will probably become a divine being? Among the silent gods, Demeter was the only one who regarded Hades with tranquility. Of the 6 siblings, she'd always had the calmest temperament, and also, she was Hades' mother-in-law. Hades nodded. To be exact, he'll be releasing the system from Alforoni's control. At the silence, he added, regardless, that child is going to gain divinity someday in the future. Poseidon began shouting, there's no way Alforoni would allow. Hades cut him off. No. I believe in him. He'll do it. There was a firmness in Hades' voice. Poseidon and the others were silent, their lips shut tightly together. The younger generation standing a step away from them glanced at each other. Apollo, Artemis, and Dionysus hadn't made their decision about Yeon-woo yet. Although their goals lined up with those of Athena, Hermes, and Ares, who favored Yeon-woo, they were concerned that it would be difficult for a mortal to succeed to the Black King's power. They thought that it would be better for one of them to take Yeon-woo as an apostle and guide him in using the Black King's power properly. The only reason they hadn't attempted it was that they'd seen the cast of the Black King absorb Azrael. However, if Hades was telling the truth, they no longer needed to worry. I can finally hand over this cumbersome crown of the underworld. I'll be relieved of all my frustrations, and I'll feel much lighter. Hades chuckled as he looked at the gods of Olympus pondering the issue. Only Poseidon's eyes flashed with a fierce light. No. A caterpillar only eats leaves, and a crow only flaps its wings, he said, meaning that no one could become something that they weren't. A mere mortal becoming divine? Impossible. That makes a mockery of all of us. Mortal, mortal. Aren't you sick of saying that word? Even though we call ourselves immortals, we aren't really ones. Still. There are destinies that just cannot be overcome. It's going against the laws of nature. Poseidon slowly stood as he continued. I'm going to fix the laws. You're going to obstruct me. Think what you want. Right now, we're working together because we have a common enemy, but I must kill that bastard and bury the Black King again. Hades' sharp canines peeked from his smiling lips. Are you saying you'll stand against me? Do you think I can't? Rumble. Hades and Poseidon's holy powers clashed once more, shaking everything around them. The thick tension of a looming fight made it difficult to breathe. The temple of the king of the underworld trembled, and dust and stones fell to the ground. Just then, the door burst open, and a woman walked in. Stop! What are the elders of Olympus doing? She was a goddess with an elegant figure, and her dark green hair flowed behind her. Each step she took pushed away the fierce waves of holy power that emanated from Hades and Poseidon. The other gods of Olympus were surprised. No one had known how much she'd changed because she hadn't returned to the heavenly world during the long period that she waited for her husband. However, the great holy power she had was leagues beyond what she'd possessed in the past. It was possible she was at the same level as her husband, Hades, or perhaps even beyond him. Although she had just arrived, the atmosphere of the temple shifted completely to her. It was Persephone, the goddess who had attained the two domains of warm spring and cold winter. She was the daughter of the goddess of the earth, Demeter, as well as Hades' wife. She paused and looked from Hades to Poseidon. Hades unconsciously trembled as he met Persephone's eyes. His wife had returned. He had been avoiding her for hundreds of years by pretending to have gone missing so that he could dedicate himself to Tartarus. He knew that they would see each other again after the Feng Shan ceremony. At the sight of her, his heart began to pound quickly. Like a frozen stream slowly melting in the warm spring sunshine, the cold king of the underworld seemed to return to the time when he'd experienced the first stirrings of love. However, he was also overcome with ruefulness when he saw Persephone's eyes. Nothing had changed. Her gaze still didn't hold any warmth or affection towards him, and it was as heavy as it had always been. I longed for you so much and thought of you every day. However, it seems like you didn't feel the same way. I thought my ardor would cool after avoiding you for such a long time, but it hasn't at all. I hoped you'd forgive me, but I suppose I'm still an unpardonable sinner in your eyes. Am I nothing more than the husband you were forced to marry and the king of the underworld that you have to pay your respects to? Hades almost couldn't stop himself from saying the words out loud. On the other hand, Poseidon scowled, displeased that his holy power had been scattered. How dare you stick your nose into a discussion restricted to Olympians? Are you behaving like this because you think your husband will support you? Poseidon glanced from Persephone to Hades, smirking. Hades' expression stiffened for the first time. How pathetic! However, Persephone just laughed, as if Poseidon wasn't important enough to give a proper reply to. Poseidon's face hardened. What? My husband is who he is, but I only speak for myself. If it's more convenient for you to split sides like that, go ahead, although it won't change how pathetic you are right now. You bitch! Poseidon couldn't keep his calm now that he'd been humiliated not just by Hades but also Hades' wife. He made a move for his trident. Hades was about to get up in surprise, but suddenly, Poseidon was tangled up by tentacles that rose from his shadow and slammed him into the ground. Boom! Urk! He struggled like a frog to escape the shadow's grip, but the tentacles merely tightened around him. Countless lines grew visible in the shadow, and they opened up to reveal eyes that blinked at him. Poseidon didn't even realize he was shivering as a strange anxiety entered his heart. When he forced himself to look up, Persephone was staring at him, her eyes expressionless. She looked even more fearsome like this. Her gaze reminded him of the eternal enemy of all the gods in Olympus, the maternal figure that titans, giants, all demonic creatures and ghosts originated from, Mother Earth, Gaia. Chapter 385. Gigantomachia, 10. Mother Earth. From the beginning of time, Mother Earth had gone by different names: Gaia, Ishtar, Hebat, Tiamat, Devi, Emer, Nuwa, Grandmother Mago, and Viera Dune. Every legend called her by a different name, a sign of her influence and independence from the societies of gods and demons. Mother Earth had always existed before the heavenly world had ever formed. In fact, she had come into existence before the universe itself had been properly constructed. And so, she had contributed a great deal to the creation of something from nothing. She raised mountains, cut hills, and made rivers flow. Then, she birthed life to fill the empty stage. She had the abilities of a god of creation. However, eventually, Mother Earth grew ostracized from her creations. The universe began to evolve smoothly without her help, and it began to move away from her grasp. As it expanded, it brought forth many stars, and large universes became zones where smaller universes collided. The world began to take on multiple dimensions. Countless heroes were born in the growing universe, and when they attained holiness from their legends, they gained transcendence. They called themselves gods, demons, dragons, and giants, and they desired to climb even higher. Mother Earth was displeased. Although she was more of a concept and didn't have a personal identity, she still believed that the universes and worlds were her children. She saw them as young entities who didn't know their place and tried to escape her control. She encompassed everything, but freedom wasn't in her vocabulary. However, Mother Earth couldn't act on her desire because of her lack of self. She ended up creating manifestations of herself to punish her misbehaving children, and these took the form of monsters and ghosts that fought bitter wars with the transcendence, the war against great beings immortalized in legends. Olympus fought a war against giants from Gaia, Asgard created mountains and hills from the death of the giant Ymir, Dilmun hunted the vicious dragon Tiamat, the Chan and G-Sex worked together for the first time to seal Nuwa, El Infernal gained powers by stealing them from Mother Earth, and so on. Each universe and world fought with Mother Earth on different fronts at the same time, and the great legends that followed them led to the creation of a single system. Unable to fight multiple battles at the same time, Mother Earth was chased out, and several universes and worlds gained their freedom from her. The Transcendents organized the groups that had formed to fight in the war and ruled over their worlds, although a damned being later trapped them in the heavenly world soon after. Still, Poseidon remembered the glory of the past, when the endless world had been in his hands. Of course, Mother Earth hadn't been completely annihilated, and wars erupted regularly. When Poseidon saw a reflection of Mother Earth in Persephone's eyes, a chill ran down his spine even though the look had only appeared for a split second, making him think he'd been mistaken. He hadn't felt this kind of terror since they'd defeated his apostle, Cronus. Clap. However, his thoughts were interrupted by Demeter, who clapped her hands together. All right, that's enough. Demeter inserted herself between the two gods. Persephone, why don't you stop here? Yes, Mother. Persephone hadn't seen her mother in a long time and couldn't deny her request. She also believed that Poseidon had gotten the message, so she took a step back. The shadows that had wrapped around Poseidon silently withdrew. Plop! Poseidon collapsed on the floor, gasping for air as he glared at Persephone. Demeter clapped her hands once more to ease the tense atmosphere. This couple is meeting for the first time in hundreds of years, so they must have a lot to talk about. Why don't we give them some time to speak in private? After all, tomorrow will be the start of a new gigantomachia. Demeter silently sent Hades signals with her eyes before she left, but Hades' expression was still clouded. After the chaotic conference ended, Hades and Persephone were left alone in silence. The fancy beverages and food on the table looked abandoned. Persephone walked around the temple in a leisurely manner and smiled brightly. Nothing has changed. As expected of you. However, Hades just silently watched her from his seat, not uttering a word. Persephone pouted, looking hurt. You're seeing your wife for the first time in such a long while and you don't have anything to say. Hades' eyelids quivered at the voice he'd thought of every day for the past hundreds of years, the voice that had taught him what love was. Have you been well? His voice shook. Do you think I was well? How many wives would be at ease if their husbands don't return home? He wanted to ask if it was the truth but forced himself not to. Is that so? I apologize. His eyes drooped sadly, and another heavy silence descended between them. Persephone laughed softly, her taciturn husband was the same as ever. She looked at him with a composed expression, the smile as warm as spring sunlight fading from her face and leaving the coldness of winter behind. Did you see what I was doing that day? Hades pressed his lips together and kept his silence. However, the incident she mentioned replayed in his mind once more. That was the day that he'd left for Tartarus from the underworld. Everything will be as Great Mother wishes. He had seen it purely by accident. He had rushed down to Tartarus after hearing that there was trouble there, and he'd been mired in the battles to defend his holy territories. He returned to the underworld to clear his head and happened to see Persephone praying alone in their bedroom, kneeling quietly on the floor. At first, he'd been moved, thinking that his wife had finally opened up her heart to him and prayed for his safe return. But he quickly realized that it was a prayer of worship to another being. He'd never heard of such a thing before. How could a god worship another god? However, when he felt the holy power that responded, he realized who Persephone had begun serving and what the rebellion of the giants and titans were leading to. It appears you did see. I wasn't entirely sure you had. I tried to hide it as best as I could, but I suppose I was careless. She slowly approached him. In her wake, the floor turned black with shadows, like ink staining paper. The color reminded Hades of himself as he watched her advance. After realizing the truth about Persephone, he had agonized for days. If he let her be, Tartarus wouldn't be the only place in danger. The entire underworld, including Erebus, would be at risk. The reason the giants and titans had been locked up in Tartarus was to cut them off from Gaia. However, if Persephone became Gaia's apostle and connected them again, it would spell disaster not only for the underworld but also stretch all the way to Olympus. From that point, it would affect the heavenly world, and the entire 98th floor would be threatened by Gaia. The incident that Olympus and other transcendents had tried to stop would rise once more. At that moment, he had understood that he needed to kill Persephone immediately. It didn't seem like she'd had Gaia's power for too long, so it was still possible for him to do it. However, he simply couldn't do it. His hand moved to his sword, but he couldn't find the strength to pull it out. How could he kill his own wife? She had been forced to live as his wife all this time because of his one-sided love, and he couldn't bring himself to hurt her again. There was only one thing he could do: repress the rebellion of the titans and giants before Persephone could act. If he could block the entrance to Tartarus, she wouldn't be able to do anything. After making his decision, Hades remained in Tartarus, letting hundreds of years pass by. He failed and couldn't even hang on to his holy territories, much less stamp out the rebellion. When Typhon, another one of Gaia's apostles, consumed Cronus' power, he even grew more influential than Hades. It was then that Hades' emotions began to curdle and turn into cynicism. He knew what the inevitable end was, even though he stalled for time. Now that the connection to Olympus had been reinstated, Persephone had descended. The moment that he had pushed back and wanted to avoid had arrived. "You knew everything, and you didn't tell anyone?" Persephone asked as she approached him. It was the question whose answer had continued to elude her. When Hades didn't return, she knew that he'd learned of her secret. However, he didn't tell Olympus at all. If he had, the rebellion wouldn't have worsened to this point. "Because I loved you." Persephone paused at his calm confession. His eyes blazed even though his voice had been quiet and composed. The gaze in his eyes were painfully familiar to her. It was the same one she'd seen the first time they'd met. He hadn't said much, but she'd known that her fate would irrevocably change. Before she could refuse, she'd practically been kidnapped and taken to the underworld and forced to marry him. She had requested help from her surroundings but had been denied every time. No one wanted to become enemies with the king of the underworld. They even said it was actually a better situation for her since gods couldn't enter a marriage of love anyway. However, Persephone never let go of this resentment. The bloom of her youth had been cut short, and she'd been abandoned in an unfamiliar place far from her mother. Her husband did everything he could to appease her, but nothing placated her indignation. And now, they had reached this point. The sacrifices and deaths of titans in Tartarus brought her more of Mother Earth's power. Whoosh! The shadows rose and tightened around Hades. Despite being at death's door, Hades didn't resist. He left his fate in her hands. He had forcibly taken away hers long ago, and now it was her turn. "You fool!" she softly whispered in his ear. "Nothing will change even if you do that." A dagger suddenly popped out of Persephone's hand and pierced Hades in the heart. His blood began to stain the shadows, turning them red as they absorbed him. The path is, finally open. Great Mother, your daughter, has opened the path of the Queen. I shall, greet you soon. A multitude of eyes opened in the darkness. Their owners, titans and giants, tore through the shadows and poured out. The gigantomachia had begun. Meanwhile, somewhere far away, Yeon-woo's eyes widened. Whoosh! Hum! The fury of the Black King around his neck shook, releasing a black light. Ding! The conditions have been met for a hidden bonus. Bonus, King of the Underworld. Chapter 386. Gigantomachia, 11. The bonus is being applied. It has failed. The bonus is being applied. It has failed. The process of succession is being paused because your level is too low. The reappraisal is starting. The discussion about your level is still actively in progress. Please wait a moment. The execution of the paused bonus will be decided once it's finished. For a short moment, Yeon-woo could feel something being enhanced deep inside his body, as though his soul were being released from a prison. He felt as if he'd gained true freedom. It was the first time he'd ever felt anything like this, and he was more than a little surprised. However, the feeling vanished with every message that said it has failed. Yeon-woo thought it had to be exoviation, one of the many steps to attaining transcendence. There was nothing else he could do since he had only killed gods so far and hadn't even been enlightened yet, but the message about the discussion of his level caught his eye. Ever since he killed Astrius, messages saying a discussion was in progress had kept popping up. Yeon-woo had no idea what they meant. If the discussions ended on a positive note, did that mean he would gain divine powers? However, as far as he knew, exoviation was something you had to do on your own. No one else could do it for you. No, you could also succeed a domain. Being given power through that method wasn't entirely great since it didn't come from his own achievement and thus would be dangerous. But of course, I'm not going to turn down a gift. At any rate, the discussion of the gods and demons was an enigma to Yeon-woo, and another mystery had been wrapped around that, the bonus that Yeon-woo had never even heard of. The King of the Underworld was definitely one of the titles given to Hades, but why was the system saying he would be succeeding the title? From the way the fury of the Black King, Cunning, was glowing, it was evident Hades was attempting something, but Yeon-woo didn't know what it was. When he thought about it, he had gotten a strong feeling that Hades was saying his last goodbyes the last time they saw each other. Did this have something to do with that? He wanted to ask Jeong-woo, who had an extensive knowledge of the tower, but he was sleeping peacefully inside the pocket watch. He needed frequent periods of rest because his spirit body was still unstable. Kane? Hyung. Yeon-woo was pulled back to reality by the voice calling for him. Doyle and the rest of the party members were staring at him. What's the matter? Nothing, something just suddenly occurred to me. So, you were saying that Persephone is acting strange? Yes. Doyle nodded with a dark expression. Yeon-woo had returned from his meeting with Athena to see the dark faces of his party members. Doyle had said something after meeting Persephone. She told me to get ready to leave with her soon. What could that mean? Doyle was Persephone's apostle, so he had gone to welcome her when she descended into Tartarus. However, even though he was her apostle, it was his first time to see her in person and his faith in her wasn't particularly deep, so he'd noticed something strange about her. It's normal to praise people or thank them for helping your husband, right? But it was as if, Our Lady Persephone and Lord Hades really married. Why? If they are, shouldn't she be glad to see the husband she's been desperately seeking for hundreds of years? But she only looked like she was hardening her resolve for something. Clever Doyle had noticed this right away. In fact, Yeon-woo also felt that the relationship between Hades and Persephone was unlike other married couples, so he couldn't simply dismiss it as a trivial matter. While the rest of the party considered this information, Khan suddenly smirked and shrugged. Ha! And here I thought it was something serious. They say that a love relationship can't be cut with a knife, and a couple isn't that easy to split up. It's best not to get in between them. After all, imagine if your husband, your wife didn't come home for hundreds of years without any news, and you found her all of a sudden. Do you think you'd be glad? You'd probably scold her severely. Really? Or you'll get divorced or something. Did gods get divorced too? The expressions of the party turned contemplative. I heard Zeus cheated on his wife multiple times. Why wouldn't divorce between gods exist? Brahm laughed. His lower body was a bit of a free spirit. Even Brahm says so. Let's stop talking about useless things and go back. This isn't something we should get involved in anyway. They nodded. What did the relationship between Hades and Persephone matter to them? They'd gotten everything they needed, and now, the only thing they had to do was return. As they prepared to leave, something cloudy swept over them and disappeared. It happened so quickly that not many people noticed it, since the party was overjoyed to finally leave the cursed Tartarus, and Pluto was still celebrating Olympus' visit. However, Yeon-woo spotted it. Holy power! He recognized the holy power of Hades that spread over his holy territories. Hades' holy power was scattering. Yeon-woo turned to Brahm in surprise, and Brahm met his eyes with a stiff expression. They were about to warn the others when a black shadow suddenly spread along the ground and a multitude of eyes opened above it. Doyle suddenly became unhinged. Aok! He attacked Khan, who was next to him, like a beast that had met its mortal enemy. Menacing black blades ejected from his fingernails. They were the product of the combination of Persephone's and the heavenly demon's holy power. Khan was caught off guard and injured. He'd never expected that Doyle, of all people, would attack him. Just before the black blades could slice through his neck, Galliard rushed from behind and rammed Doyle to the ground. Boom! At the same time, Victoria recited a curse that wrapped invisible chains around Doyle. Gore! Gore! Doyle thrashed around like a captured wild animal. His eyes pulsed with demonic energy as the veins on his face and arms swelled up. What in the world? Khan glowered in disgust at the blinking eyes that were observing them. Their appearance was likely related to Doyle's abrupt assault, but before Khan could say anything, eyes began to move through the shade. Creatures with sinister auras seemed to rip through the blanket of shadows. They were the subordinates of the Titans and the Giants. The creatures that the party had only ever seen in battle roared as one. Grah! What's going on? Why are those things here? Shocked expressions appeared on the faces of Pluto, who had just been relaxing and celebrating. The monsters quickly moved to carry out their master's order: kill everything that breathed. It's an ambush. The Titans are ambushing us. Get in formation. Weapons. Bring the weapons. Pluto began to move hurriedly, but most of them had left their weapons in the barracks so that they could enjoy the festivities. They had also been unprepared for any danger because they were inside the holy territory. The damage the monsters inflicted on them was great. What in the world? Shock gripped the members of Yeon-woo's party as well. This was the core of Hades' territory, where the temple of the king of the underworld stood. None of them had ever imagined an attack in his place. They quickly whipped out their weapons. Roar! Rip everyone apart, we've finally entered the heart of Hades. Olympus, is there, brothers, return the humiliation of the past? Titans hundreds of kilometers tall stretched out and began to strike the temple. The Titans that had appeared at the front lines at Buwangji were accompanied by giants that they had never seen before. They were around 5 meters tall, with lion heads and snake bodies or other monstrous forms. Their appearances were befitting of the children of Gaia, who birthed all kinds of monsters. The problem was that they seemed to have absorbed Cronus power as well, and so their strengths didn't fall short of the Titans. In fact, a few of the giants even seemed to surpass the Titans. The gods of Olympus quickly realized what was going on and began to move. It didn't matter how the intruders managed to invade the holy territory, it was more urgent to deal with them first. How dare you? Who do you think you are? Poseidon released his power as he raised his trident. With a rumble, storms whirled around and started to batter the larger titans. Apollo raised his bow and shot glowing arrows one after the other. Artemis pulled out her twin swords and slashed through the giants. Athena, Ares, Hermes, Dionysus, and the other gods released their divine powers. It was the beginning of the Gigantomachia. The fallen titans and giants had risen once more to commence a new war. The temple of the king of the underworld became a battlefield of gods in an instant. Victoria, please take Henova and Doyle somewhere far away from here. Khan, Galliard, and Kreutz, please look for Lam and help restore Pluto's battle lines. Brahm, please accompany me to the temple. Even in the middle of the pandemonium, Yeon-woo calmly assessed the situation to the best of his abilities. It was apparent that all escape routes had been blocked, so it was crucial that they set up the battle lines and end the confusion first. The energy I feel from them is familiar. The energy that the giants were exuding wasn't strange at all, but it was clear that it had something more than just Cronus power. He needed to find out what it was. No one argued against his orders, and everyone quickly moved to carry them out as Yeon-woo and Brahm rushed to the temple of the king of the underworld. It was where the most intense battles were taking place, and any mortals who stepped in risked being killed. However, neither Yeon-woo nor Brahm cared. Hyung, this is... Yet. You're right. Jeong-woo was thinking the same thing as Yeon-woo, and so he was outside the pocket watch with a grim expression. Infected Mother Earth looks at you fixedly. He bit his lower lip at the message popping up only for him. It had followed him around ever since he'd killed Ether, but he hadn't been able to tell Yeon-woo about it. Yeon-woo just read the remnants of the energy and nodded heavily. Viera Dune. It's her energy. What did she do? It was technically the holy power of Mother Earth, but Mother Earth had been infected by Viera Dune, so it was the same thing. They didn't know how she'd managed to pull the attack off. Mother Earth's holy power was oozing thickly out of the shadow that fell across Hades' holy territory. What had she done? Yeon-woo had no idea, but he was sure of one thing, the person Mother Earth/Viera Dune was working with. Persephone. She'd been acting very suspiciously, and no one else had the means to do it. Also, it was easy to understand her motivations. In the legends of Hades and Persephone, Persephone had always been the injured party, and it was reasonable to think that she'd grown vindictive and planned the uprising. Did Hades know this would happen? Yeon-woo thought he did. He might have even been expecting his death. Yeon-woo had sensed his feelings accurately when he accepted Kaini. I should be the one thanking you. Our soldiers are in high spirits thanks to your efforts. If not for your assistance, Tartarus would have crumbled long ago. The smile that Hades had given him lingered in Yeon-woo's mind. It was cold but also caring. Hades wasn't someone who could just die like this. More than anything, there was no way Yeon-woo would allow Viera Dune to fulfill her desires. Swish! Yeon-woo clenched his teeth and stepped on wind path, hoping Hades was safe. Chapter 387 Gigantomachia, 12. How did Viera Dune manage to swallow up Mother Earth? After all, Mother Earth was a conceptual entity without any ego. She was an amalgam of data, like a cloud server. However, that meant that it was possible to infect her if Viera Dune infiltrated her mind like a virus and continued to grow inside it. Lucille's soulstone would make the process even more likely. Many of the gods and demons of the heavenly world had set aside all their differences and cooperated just to catch Lucille. Some even compared him to the heavenly demon. Even a remnant of a being like this would be an incredible help to Viera Dune, who was already on the edge of exuviation. But it's strange. Although Lucille's soulstone was a priceless treasure, Mother Earth was as powerful as Lucille, if not stronger. Even if she had no sense of self, she had desire. Didn't she realize that she was in danger? She must have had some kind of defense mechanism. But if that were so, that meant that there was only one reason Viera-dun and Mother Earth had united: Mother Earth wished for it as well. Of course, this was only Yeon-woo's guess. It was also entirely possible that Viera-dun simply swallowed up her mother, or Mother Earth welcomed her because she had a scheme of her own. Only the parties involved knew the truth. There was only one thing Yeon-woo could be sure of: they were meeting as enemies. His eyes grew cold and flinty. On the way to the temple, Yeon-woo had a feeling that a path was opening just for him. Considering the violence of the battle between the gods of Olympus and the titans and giants, it would be impossible for someone to find a way through the storms, lightning, and fire that wreaked havoc across the holy territory. The fighting was so bloody that anyone who was swept up in it would instantly die. It was like an apocalypse. Yeon-woo had been ready to use his awakened dragon body and sky wings to clear a path, but it turned out he didn't even have to. As he walked down the path to the temple of the king of the underworld, the battles around him seemed to veer away, and none of the Titan subordinates made any attempt to attack him. Yeon-woo instantly realized that this was an invitation from Persephone. She had ordered her subordinates to clear the way so he could reach her easily. He gritted his teeth. It was clear she wanted something from him, and the likelihood that his worst fears would be realized was becoming greater. Once he reached the dark and quiet temple, he found Persephone waiting inside, sitting on the throne that belonged to Hades. "You're here." Her smile was charming, but it couldn't distract from the domineering aura that she exuded. It was as though the person he'd met in the breezy spring garden a few months ago didn't exist anymore. The atmosphere was dark and depressing, and it reeked of winter dampness. The heavy energy around her was familiar: Viera-dun. He recognized the gaze looking down from somewhere, as well. "Infected Mother Earth is looking in your direction." At first, the weak gaze had been difficult to sense, but it had intensified recently. Yeon-woo knew that the gaze wasn't directed on him but on the pocket watch. Persephone crossed her legs, at ease now that a great entity was supporting her. The great cocoons hanging from the ceiling shook. There were 6 of them hanging over the throne incubating some kind of creature, and each one was draped in thin strings of shadows. He sensed a dense holy power leaking from one of them. What happened to Hades? He could guess what had happened, but he still wanted to confirm. A corner of Persephone's lips rose, and she jerked her head up to indicate the cocoons. The largest cocoon shook. "My husband's doing well, as you can see. I would wake him to receive our visitor, but he's in a deep sleep. Unfortunately, you'll have to find a chance to greet him next time." Her smile was as cold as the ones that Hades had often shown. Persephone touched the cocoon with her fingertips and turned back to Yeon-woo again. "Anyway, I invited you here to talk about something more useful." "What is it?" "Before we begin discussing the details, why don't you sit down?" She clapped lightly, and as the lanterns flickered, a large table groaning under a sumptuous feast appeared. Persephone slowly descended from the throne and took a seat, waving her hand to invite Yeon-woo to sit down. However, he only looked at her and asked, "What do you plan to do?" "The meat is delicious, it's a shame I'm the only one enjoying it." Persephone grinned, slicing into a steak. Then, she lifted her wine glass and took a sip as she continued. "I only have one thing to say, I want you to switch sides." Yeon-woo's eyebrow twitched. The pocket watch became quiet as well. "Are you asking me to work for you?" "No. You might not realize this, but I don't like having subordinates. I'm not interested in leading others, guiding them, or taking responsibility. I'm asking to work together." It was almost unbelievable that a transcendent who saw players as little more than bugs was asking him to partner with her. "I think highly of you, number. Although you're only a player, all of your accomplishments have been surprising, from the Philosopher's Stone, an item from another universe, to the Black King's power. I see why the heavenly world is in such an uproar. The last persons to cause such a commotion," she dabbed at the sauce on her lips with a napkin and smiled. "Bathory, Faust, and more recently, Neu. It's already an achievement to be compared to them." Yeon-woo didn't reply. And I think my husband is right that if any player gains divinity, it'll be you. Persephone put down her fork and knife quietly. I have a very high opinion of you, and I don't think it's a bad thing to work with you. You'll succeed the Black King someday, after all. So, what do you think? Would you like to work together? She extended her hand to Yeon-woo, as if telling him to grab hold of it. He looked at her hand wordlessly for a while and asked, "Is that your will, or the will of the one behind you?" Infected Mother Earth looks in your direction. Is that important? Yes. I am her manifestation and spiritual body. Her will is mine, and my will is hers. Is that so? This must be the present that Doyle was talking about. Correct. What do you think? I'm sure it's not a bad idea for you, either. Persephone smiled brightly, as if she couldn't imagine that he would refuse. Mother Earth's blessing, an alliance with the giants who will capture Olympus soon, and a guarantee of divinity. Aren't these already huge advantages for your growth? Even after you gain transcendence, you'll be able to progress smoothly. The heavenly world will be at your feet. As he listened to her, he looked up, glaring at the presence behind Persephone. You said you no longer had any interest in the lower world, and you acted like you've already become a real god. Is this all that you've been plotting behind the scenes, Vieira? Persephone's face hardened because she knew who Yeon-woo was talking about. Number, stop. I thought you were planning something amazing, but nothing has changed. Yeon-woo's smile was twisted. He'd truly wondered if Persephone had a grand ideology in mind when she asked him to work together, but it turned out that Vieira Dune simply hadn't let go of her greed despite ascending to the heavenly world. Persephone was just a laughable, insignificant marionette. She knew about the relationship between Jeong-woo and Vieira Dune, but she had the nerve to suggest this. Yeon-woo and Jeong-woo were nothing more than a joke to her. Everything she'd said about working together, her high assessment of him, and his bright future had all been bullshit. It was more likely that she only wanted the cast of the Black King and the throne of the underworld that Hades had left behind. Infected Mother Earth looks in your direction. Fine. You should continue living like that and ascend to a higher place. Yeon-woo's smile deepened. It'll be a lot more rewarding when I pull you down, then. Number. Persephone slammed her hand on the table and shouted. However, Yeon-woo moved more quickly than she did. Even before she stood up, he already began to awaken his dragon body. Crunch! Draconic pressure began to flurry around him. Thanks to its large amounts of divine and demonic factors, the storm of draconic pressure crushed the table and shook the temple, whipping the food and drink into the air. His skin flipped over to reveal dark dragon scales that seemed to be infused with the void. They were sharper and tougher than before. The fourth step power is being released. Power, mana control. Mana control. Description: the ancient dragon Kalidas set up an 8-step process to help the contractor adjust to the dragon body quickly. This is the fourth step. Within the territory of their power, dragons were glorious and supreme beings who pulled the mana stream and created new laws around them. Stream converter. The mana stream that flows around the world's surface is the source and repository of all mana, and even great beings cannot access this easily. The draconic species are the only ones who have been blessed by mana. With the elemental contact achieved in the third step, you are now allowed more access to the mana stream, and depending on affinity, you can pull part of it to you. The higher the affinity, the greater the amount of mana you can control, and at times, you can create new laws to access the territory of creation. However, there is a significant amount of resistance after controlling the mana stream. Mana supply. The mana. The dragon's territory, Bina, has been strengthened. You exercise control over powers and elemental magic power within the territory. All stats increase by a set number within a set time. You have achieved half of the steps to becoming one of the draconic species. You have made an achievement that is not easily accomplished. Additional karma will be provided. You have acquired 10,000 karma. You have acquired 20,000 additional karma. Demarcation has been successful. Yeon-woo had continued improving his abilities through battle experiences even after he'd already achieved the demonic divine draconic body, which was why he'd managed to pass the critical third step. The fourth step went more smoothly than he expected since he already had a significant amount of factors and achieved heaven bracket, which raised his level. The feeling of the fourth step of the awakening was giddying. Everything in the territory felt like it was under his control. His senses had already been honed before, but now he'd finally made contact with the surface of the base element that made up the world, ideas, the composition of truths. He could now sense the alternative surface of items and control them. You dare to threaten me? Persephone scowled. Not only had a mortal rejected her offer and mocked the god she served, it seemed like he was even threatening her now. Her murderous aura grew into a windy storm that whirled around her. As though it were mixed with draconic pressure, it shook the temple until it seemed that everything would crumble around them. Still, there was no way Yeon-woo's draconic pressure could handle Persephone's energy. Objects that looked like thorns shot out of the shadows on the ground to invade Yeon-woo's territory. As he stood surrounded by them, Yeon-woo looked as though he were in great danger. However, Yeon-woo just smiled coldly, not surprised. Who's threatening you? You're being delusional. At the same time, Yeon-woo opened subspace and pulled Vigrid out to slice at the imperfections his draconic divine eyes revealed. Vigrid releases a hidden true name, Durandal. Folklore, cutting in two with one strike of the sword. Durandal was one of the sharpest of the holy swords, and there was even a legend about how it cut an opponent's horse in half as it rushed to the opponent's helm. Vigrid's sharpness slid past the shadow thorns next to Persephone's face, and by the time she realized that Yeon-woo wasn't aiming for her but the cocoon behind her, it was too late. Rib. The shadowy strands split to reveal Hades. He didn't move, as though he were in a deep sleep. The cocoon was a mechanism to squeeze out all of the holy power in his body and even his soul. If Hades were lost to it, the authority of the underworld would be lost as well. The shadow moved to the cocoon once more, but Yeon-woo clenched his fist and raised it. A shadow that belonged to him had finished its battle and was now covering Hades. It was a spirit Gwai. Chapter 388. Gigantomachia, 13. By the time Persephone's shadow reached the cocoon, the spirit Gwai was already retreating after swallowing Hades whole. How dare you! Her face twisted in fury, revealing her cruelty. Not only had Yeon-woo rejected her, he'd even stolen Hades away after all the trouble she'd gone through to capture her husband. It was an unforgivable threat, especially since she hadn't yet absorbed all the holy power within the territory. Persephone waved her hand, and shadows twisted around her in a tornado-like flurry. However, Yeon-woo managed to intercept her move once more. Sky wings, temporary. He spread both wings open simultaneously, blowing away the rushing shadows between him and Persephone. Boom! Although the power only lasted for a short while, whenever Yeon-woo spread both his wings, he was confident he wouldn't fall short of most gods. The explosion ruptured through the temple and crushed the marble floors and columns, forcing the building to collapse. The shadow that expanded from inside the temple threw off the rubble, but Yeon-woo had already escaped. Persephone roared hysterically, "Catch him! Catch him!" The eyes in the shadow pierced through and emerged to chase after Yeon-woo. Yeon-woo dashed away after withdrawing his sky wings to save energy and opening his fire wings instead. In his arms, he held Hades, who was as pale as a corpse but still continued to breathe. He's still alive. However, it was too soon to feel relieved. Hades' breath was faint, and it seemed as though it would stop at any moment. Because his holy power had been taken, he was little more than a shell, and the divinity that made up his spiritual body was fragmenting and scattering. At this rate, it was possible that Hades might completely disappear. What should I do? He considered taking Hades to Athena and Hermes, but with the war between Olympus and the Titans and Giants going on, he would just end up getting unwelcome attention from those who wanted to swallow up Hades and take his holy territory. And they most likely want to take the columns of light, the stairs to Olympus. The Titans and Giants had always desired to escape Tartarus and ascend to Olympus. Now that the gods of Olympus had descended and the stairs were still connected between Tartarus and Olympus, it was their chance. It was all the more reason Yeon-woo had to protect Hades, stop his divinity from disappearing, and help him recover his holy power. The problem was that Yeon-woo had no idea how to do any of these things. Neither did Jeong-woo. Even though he'd repeated the special benefit multiple times, it was rare to make close connections with gods or demons. Hardly anything was known about transcendence in the first place. Yeon-woo looked around in hopes of an answer, but none of the gods or demons attempted to help him. Agars licks his lips as he looks at your arms. The King of Seven Hells watches you with close attention. Vimalasitra bursts out laughing at the first war between gods in a long while. A small number of gods express concern about Mother Earth. Most of them were looking on with amusement, and a few were worried about Mother Earth. As competitors of Olympus, they only saw a large event like this as an opportunity to increase their own influence. Yeon-woo was on his own, and his mind was jumbled with all kinds of thoughts. But, why is Hades in this condition? He couldn't understand it. Hades was one of the higher gods of Olympus. Even if Persephone was Gaia's apostle, there was no way they could defeat him like this. He'd been powerful enough to keep Typhon, the Titans, and the Giants at bay for centuries all by himself. Also, it wasn't as though he didn't know what Persephone was plotting and had been taken by surprise. Is it possible? Just as a thought occurred to Yeon-woo, Hades' eyelids quivered. He opened his eyes with a grimace, as though he were feeling dizzy. However, he grinned when he saw Yeon-woo's face. So we meet like this. He clucked his tongue and looked behind Yeon-woo at a colossal shadow hot on their heels. Ahead of them, he could see the monstrous giants Hippolytus and Polybotes. Did you rescue me? Hades shook his head as he understood the situation. He didn't think he would ever open his eyes again. Was it fortune or misfortune? Regardless of what it was, he was in this situation now. I see. It failed. He realized that he hadn't successfully passed down the throne of the underworld to Yeon-woo. It seemed as if the gods and demons of death whose attention was focused on Yeon-woo were still discussing something about him and affecting the system of the tower to postpone the succession to the throne. Also, that damned Alforoni had a hand in it as well. With Alforoni blocking Yeon-woo's ascension to divinity, there was no way Yeon-woo could succeed Hades, and all Hades' plans had been thwarted. Why? Hades frowned at Yeon-woo's question, not understanding what he meant. His divinity was scattering away, and his entire body was screaming in pain because he had lost too much holy power. What? Why did you try to kill yourself? Hades didn't speak, and silence stretched between them. There was a reason why Persephone had defeated him so effortlessly and why nothing had prevented the Titans and Giants from appearing at the temple of the king of the underworld. Hades hadn't resisted. This made Yeon-woo feel betrayed. I know you feel guilty about Persephone. The legend is famous even in the lower world. Hades didn't speak. But you know that you're disappointing those who've believed you and followed you, right? You're making a mockery of our faith. Hades' attempt to unburden himself had pushed others into the path of misfortune. Even though they bickered among themselves, Olympus had descended to help him. Pluto fought for hundreds of years because they trusted him. The residents of the underworld relied on him. Yeon-woo had opened up to him. Everyone who put their faith in Hades had been hit by a sudden bolt. Was giving me the bonus of the throne of the underworld a consolation for those you would leave behind? Of course, Hades hadn't tried to die without making arrangements for Yeon-woo to succeed as the king of the underworld. Hades had likely believed that with this position, Yeon-woo would be able to help Pluto and escape Tartarus. He'd left the Titans and Giants alone to keep Olympus on their toes, assuming that Hermes and Athena would be able to stop them. It was also probably that he'd made arrangements for his subordinates so that they could rise again without him. However, no matter what, it was still a betrayal of trust. From the start, the only thing I've ever done was run away, Hades spoke with a bitter smile. On the outside, I pretended to care for everyone and behave responsibly. However, whenever I was faced with a difficult task, I avoided it and ran away. Yeon-woo was silent. Even during the fight with Cronus, I said I'd already put my younger brother on the throne and stood at the rear. I didn't want to be bothered to help establish Olympus, so I turned my back and said I'd take care of the underworld. Although others might have seen him as a king with incredible power and status, he was only an observer who watched the events of the world go past. He had done the same thing with Persephone. After he'd fallen in love with her beauty, he'd forced her to marry him even though he knew she'd be miserable in an unfamiliar place. He pretended not to see her suffering, hoping she'd reciprocate his love one day even though he didn't make any special effort to win it. When he learned Persephone was working with Gaia, he'd run away again without even trying to convince her to stop. He'd headed to Tartarus to deal with the Titans and Giants, although he knew it wasn't the reason why Persephone turned her back on him. And even now, although Hades said he loved Persephone, he was still trying to escape because he didn't like being involved in complicated matters. "You're saying you don't want to be responsible for your mistakes?" Yeon-woo said in a cold voice after listening to Hades. Hades' smile grew darker. "In a way. Are you still planning on turning your back on everyone who believes in you?" Hades was silent for a while. He saw the distance between Yeon-woo and the giants grow smaller. Rumble. He saw Pluto and the gods of Olympus fighting desperately beyond the collapsed temple. A contemplative expression appeared on his face for a moment, followed by a mixture of emotions. He bit his lip and looked down at his hand, which was already half transparent. His divinity was disappearing, and his holy power was leaking out like water. He wasn't going to last long. Yeon-woo looked at Hades with a complex expression on his face. Just a few days ago, the world was at his feet, and now he seemed to be teetering on the edge of a cliff. "What do you want me to do? Take responsibility for your actions." Yeon-woo's eyes blazed. Hades opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, then closed it again with a heavy nod. "I will. Can you put me down? But don't worry about them. Even if I'm little more than dead wood right now, I'm still useful enough for that." Hades narrowed his eyes and waved his hand. Boom! The approaching shadows of the giants and Persephone crashed into an invisible wall.